Hey guys, tonight we slip into something fragrant, hand-carved and slightly obsessive. You're not marching off to war, uncovering a pharaoh's tomb, or wielding a scimitar in a glittering palace court. No, tonight you're doing something far more perilous, organizing an Ottoman spice rack with your bare hands. In 98-degree heat, while dodging passive-aggressive aunties and trying not to sneeze yourself unconscious in a cloud of cinnamon dust. You're standing in the courtyard of your family's house in 17th century Bursa. It's early morning, and the sun's already elbowing its way through the grapevine trellis above you, laying streaks of light across glazed turquoise tiles. The tiles glisten like cool water, but don't let them fool you. This day is going to warm up fast. A sleepy clink of copper spoons comes from the kitchen. Somewhere, a neighbor's rooster sounds like it's gargling gravel. The house smells faintly of dried mint, flatbread, and the faint, floral smoke of the morning incense stick your mother lit before anyone else woke up. You stretch your arms over your head and try not to knock the hanging basket of dried eggplants. You almost succeed. The courtyard is a small, perfect square, 3 potted lemon trees, a chipped fountain that hasn't burbled since last spring, and 2 thin cats who are either fighting or kissing beneath the laundry line. You shuffle past them in your soft slippers, your robes swishing with the faint scent of rosewater from last night's laundry rinse. The kitchen door creaks open. It's not heavy, just dramatic. Everything here is a little dramatic. Inside it's dark and cool. Coolish. Cool if you've only ever lived inside an oven. The walls are thick, plastered white, and the windows have those beautiful wooden screens that let in dappled light like falling lace. And there, at the far corner of the room, half hidden behind a clay oven, is the shrine. The masterpiece. The reason you've dragged yourself out of bed before the pigeons even finished their first song, the spice rack. It's mounted proudly on the wall like a nobleman's sabre, but instead of steel it boasts polished walnut wood, inlaid with thin slivers of mother-of-pearl. Tiny floral vines curl across the surface in symmetrical patterns, and if you squint just right, you can still see your great-aunt's initials scratched into one corner, not carved, scratched like a warning or a claim. There are 15 small drawers, each one labelled with swirls of calligraphy. Some have knobs shaped like fruit, grapes, lemons, one poorly executed melon that honestly looks more like a deflated goat bladder. Still, it's your favourite. The top shelf holds jars, ceramic, painted, lidded. A few have delicate lids shaped like flowers. One has a lid that used to be shaped like a flower but was dropped during the Great Cumin Spill of 1679. You were not alive then, but the story is told with the hushed reverence of legend. You reach for the jar of sumac and open it carefully. The tangy, wine-coloured powder sends up a faint burst of sour, earthy scent that tickles your nose. You don't sneeze, barely. You're here to begin your real work, the morning inventory. In theory, it's a daily ritual of order and peace. In practice, it's a slow descent into madness as you try to remember whether you actually used the last of the fenugreek or if your cousin borrowed it again for her mysterious skin treatment. Each jar has its own spoon. This isn't just decoration, it's hygiene, pride, protocol. No mixing spoons, no double dipping. The spoons themselves are their own little art pieces, silver, copper, bone, one carved from olive wood and stained faintly red from years of paprika duty. You wipe each one down with a soft cloth and place them just so in their notched stand beside the rack. Historians still argue whether Ottoman kitchens were truly the exclusive domain of women or whether men of high status occasionally dabbled in culinary arts. One thing is certain, the spice rack, that was yours. Territory sacred, a badge of identity, taste, power. Mothers passed them down, daughters personalized them. Occasionally, cousins stole them and tried to act like they didn't. You move to the bottom drawer and tug it open. It sticks a bit. It always does. Behind it is a tiny note, folded into quarters, written on old linen paper. It's a recipe for a headache cure made with mint, vinegar, and, curiously, ground apricot pit. The handwriting is familiar. You smile. Outside, the day is beginning in earnest. You hear the watermelon vendor shouting up the alley. The call to prayer drifts gently down from the minaret, wrapped in early light. You know you should start preparing the breakfast tray, but the spice rack calls to you. One more drawer, one more scent, one more story tucked into saffron and clove. There's a warmth to the wood beneath your fingers, a worn groove where so many hands have reached, stirred, opened, shared. It's just a rack, just a bit of storage. And yet, not just, never just. You slide open a drawer of dried rose petals. They crackle like old paper. You smile again, knowing later today you'll press a few into your cousin's tea, though she says she hates the smell. She doesn't. She just likes the attention of complaining about it. And so begins your morning, here in this quiet, fragrant heart of the home. 1,000 histories packed into tiny, colourful, crooked-labelled jars. Welcome to your day. You wrap your shawl more snugly around your shoulders. It's not cold, not really, but the thick stone walls of the kitchen hold on to the dawn like a secret. Your slippers tap softly across the painted floor tiles as you cross to the hook where your apron waits. Cotton, cream-coloured, embroidered with a ring of tiny blue tulips around the hem. You tie it with practiced ease, the knot landing perfectly at the small of your back, and give it a little tug. Time to get dressed for battle. Culinary battle, that is. The Ottoman household, especially one with a kitchen this size, runs on a complex system of rank and routine. Your mother manages the household accounts. Your cousin Fatma insists she's in charge of meal planning, although everyone ignores her notes. But you are the spice steward, the keeper of the jars, the guardian of the ginger. And with that role comes ceremony, responsibility, and a bit of gossip-fueled theatrics. You open the pantry door, and it's like slipping into another world. Dim light filters in through a high lattice window, falling in soft gold onto shelves lined with ceramic jars. Not just any ceramic jars. These are hand-painted, each with a different symbol that's meant to match the contents, though over time a few symbols got switched during the great shelf shuffle of 2 summers ago. There's the bold red tulip for sumac, the green olive branch for dried mint, the pomegranate flower, slightly smeared, for ground chili, and the peach, which no one remembers assigning, but it now houses coriander, and so we all just pretend that makes sense. Some jars are labelled in Arabic, others in Ottoman Turkish script, and a few feature cryptic pictograms that only your grandmother could interpret. For example, the tiny dancing man with a fez? That's for cloves, don't ask. You step deeper into the pantry, breathing in the scent of history, or at least of cumin, bay, cardamom, and a hint of drying onions. You run your fingers along the rows, the tips catching on tiny chips and grooves in the ceramic. These aren't pristine, factory-perfect jars. They're a living record. One has a burn mark from when it sat too close to the brazier. Another has a long crack glued with a careful hand and outlined in gold, a tradition borrowed from distant Persia, where mended things are made more beautiful for their flaws. You spot the paprika jar. It's painted with a tiny flame. And not by accident, it's not just for storage. It's a warning. That particular paprika was gifted to your household by a travelling merchant from Hungary who had no concept of the Ottoman palate's spice tolerance. The first time your uncle used it, he cried for 2 hours and asked to revise his will. The jar hasn't moved since. As you check each jar, you begin your daily whisper count. 1 scoop of cinnamon left, 3 of black cumin, a handful of cardamom pods rattling like marbles. The cinnamon's low because of your mother's recent obsession with adding it to morning tea. The cardamom dwindles fast whenever your aunt's in charge of desserts. She says she's making pudding, but it tastes suspiciously like perfume. Historians still debate whether Ottoman housewives deliberately chose specific motifs for their spice racks based on taste, status, or superstition. Some believe the art was purely decorative, Others point to recurring patterns, crescent moons for digestive herbs, suns for fiery spices, birds for aphrodisiacs, as signs of intentional symbolism. You don't have an academic opinion, you just know that when you replaced the cracked nutmeg jar with one featuring a snake pattern, your sister-in-law refused to eat anything for 3 days. You slide open a narrow drawer near the bottom, your spice drawer's annex, reserved for things that don't quite fit anywhere else. Here lives the dried lime your cousin brought back from Damascus, a jar of fermented cherry paste you've been too scared to open, and a cloth bundle of dried lemon thyme you tied up 3 years ago and never used because it smells like an over-enthusiastic soap. It's in this corner of the pantry, where light barely reaches and everything smells like memory, that you find your favourite jar. It's round, squat, and painted a deep blue with a lid that doesn't quite fit. Inside is mastic, pale, resinous tears collected from the mastic trees of Chios. You've never liked the taste. It's sharp, like biting into a pine cone. But you love the sound the little pebbles make when you shake the jar. It reminds you of rain on the tiled roof above the hammam. Soft, sudden, ancient. You lift the jar to your nose and inhale. Once your grandmother told you that mastic kept away bad dreams. Once your cousin said it kept away husbands. Both statements were delivered with the same level of authority and the same glint in the eye. You smile to yourself and set the jar back. Just then, a draught creeps through the pantry, fluttering the corners of the embroidered shelf cloths. They're delicate, white cotton with tiny red pepper clusters stitched into the edges. Your mother made those before you were born. The stitching's uneven in places, but nobody dares replace them. Not just because of tradition, but because the last time someone suggested it, your mother threw a spoon across the kitchen and hit a vase with unerring accuracy. You check the final shelf. The saffron jar is half full. Thank goodness, that stuff is more valuable than jewelry and harder to measure than your aunt's compliments. You once dropped a few strands into a pot of stew and your uncle nearly passed out from pride. Not because of the taste, because he thought it made him look rich. And that's the thing about these spice racks. They're not just storage, they're statements of taste, of elegancy, of generational knowledge. In an empire stretching across 3 continents, with spice caravans arriving from the Levant, India, North Africa, and beyond, the Ottoman kitchen became a sort of crossroads. And the spice rack? The map. You close the pantry door slowly, leaving the scents to settle. Outside, the cats have finally decided kissing is better than fighting. Good for them. You untie your apron, ready to face the rest of the day. But in your mind, you're still thinking about one drawer that squeaks, one label you want to repaint, and whether anyone will notice if you reorder the jars just slightly to make room for that new peppercorn blend you've been hiding under your bed. You crouch in front of the middle drawer, the one with the tiny brass pomegranate knob slightly tarnished and wobbling just a little if you tug too hard. This drawer is special. Not because of what's inside, it currently holds nothing more than a modest stash of bay leaves and a dried slice of lemon that no one remembers adding, but because of what it represents. This drawer was your initiation, the first one your mother ever let you organize. You were 9, probably sticky with grape molasses, and absolutely certain that alphabetizing dried herbs by their Arabic names was the pinnacle of culinary sophistication. Your mother, bless her patient soul, didn't laugh. She just handed you a clean scrap of linen and let you label it yourself. The script is still there. Crooked, overconfident, slightly damp from a long-ago cooking spill. You smile as you lean in, catching the delicate, peppery scent of the bay leaves. They've lost some of their strength, sure, but they still hold enough power to transform an average stew into something that makes your uncle pretend he's weeping from nostalgia, and not because he burned his tongue. There's a certain pride to spice stewardship. You feel it every time someone walks into the kitchen and breathes deeply, every time a neighbor peeks at your rack and pretends not to be jealous, and especially every time a new jar arrives from the bazaar, blank and full of potential, like a page in a diary just waiting for a story, and a scoop of turmeric. Speaking of turmeric, you reach up to the yellow glazed jar with the tulip motif. It's heavier than expected. That means your cousin hasn't raided it for her sore throat compresses, which, suspiciously, never seem to be applied to her throat. You unscrew the lid, careful not to let the powdered gold puff into the air. It settles into the tiny lines on your fingertips, and you think, this is how secrets leave their mark. Historians still argue whether turmeric was originally brought into the Ottoman culinary scene via Indian trade routes or through medical texts that found their way westward from Persia. What's agreed upon is this. Once it arrived, it stayed. It coloured sauces, softened pain, stained fingertips, and sometimes, accidentally, dyed aprons, children, and the family cat. That poor cat. She still has a yellow patch on her tail, and nobody has the heart to tell her. You set the jar back and glance toward the shelf that holds the vinegar crocks. Ah, yes. The ever-changing parade of bottles, each one labelled in your mother's handwriting. Pomegranate, white grape, fig, maybe? Some of these vinegars are pungent enough to wake the dead. You once opened one and nearly lost your eyebrows, but nestled between the vinegar crocks is your real prize today, the cinnamon jar, thick, heavy, and painted in soft crimson swirls. It has a carved lid that always sticks just a little. You love that. The resistance, the little tug, it makes opening it feel ceremonial. Inside, the cinnamon sticks are rough and curled, like ancient scrolls. You crack one between your fingers. The scent is warm, deep, like the sigh of a spice merchant who's been walking through desert sun all day. The Ottomans prized cinnamon not just for its flavour but for its scent. In wealthier homes it was added to perfumes, to bathwater, even to the tiny pouches sewn into linens and pillows. One slightly over-ambitious poet claimed that sleeping on cinnamon-scented pillows gave him dreams of flying over Constantinople. You tried it once. You dreamed you were stuck in a jam jar. Your cousin enters the kitchen trailing a shawl and an attitude. She nods at your cinnamon and sighs. "We're nearly out again?" she asks. You glance at the half-full jar. "Nearly," you say, though technically it's more than enough. But you know what she's doing, angling for an excuse to visit the market. She's not subtle. You let her think she's gotten away with it and return to your work. The next drawer sticks a little. Inside is dried orange peel, cracked and curling, like miniature suns. This batch is old, from last year's harvest, when your aunt overestimated how much citrus the household could consume in a month. She said she had a vision. She meant she saw a discount at the market. There's something comforting about opening a drawer and seeing something you prepared yourself. Those peels? You laid them out by hand, turned them in the sun, brought them inside when it rained unexpectedly, and yelled at the neighbour boy who tried to feed them to his goat. You run your fingers over the lid edges again. The patterns are all hand-painted, of course. Each spice rack is a little work of art passed down or custom-made. Wealthier families would sometimes have them commissioned by woodworkers in the same guilds that made furniture for palaces. One of your neighbours, scandalously nouveau riche, even had hers inlaid with silver and lapis lazuli. It looked like a jewellery box. Nobody had the heart to tell her it resembled a coffin. You're more partial to the humble elegance of yours. Walnut wood, polished from years of handling. The occasional chip or scratch tells a story, like the small burn mark on the bottom left drawer, from that one time someone, not naming names, tried to toast cumin seeds directly on the rack. A crime in at least 3 provinces. Down at the very bottom, in a drawer no one ever checks, lives the spice blend. Not a spice blend, the family blend. Passed down orally, carefully memorized, never written. You know it by scent, a swirl of dried lemon, coriander, cumin, mint, and something else you've never been able to identify. Your mother just calls it the thing that gives it the thing. You open the drawer slowly. It's low on powder now, time for a new batch. But the smell rises up anyway, gentle and sharp, familiar in a way nothing else ever is. You close your eyes for a moment. This is what home smells like. You'll make more later, grinding the ingredients with your small brass mortar and pestle, taking care to whisper the names as you add them, just like your grandmother did, and her grandmother before her, because if you don't say the names, it won't taste the same. Obviously. You close the drawer, set the cloth straight, and lean back on your heels. Morning has passed, the sun has fully claimed the courtyard, and the cats have moved from kissing to napping. You stand slowly, stretch your arms, and wonder, briefly, what it would take to convince your cousin to paint new labels for the drawers. Maybe cinnamon bribery would work, but that's a task for another day. For now, the rack is ordered, the spoons are clean, and the story of your kitchen, its spices, its spills, its secrets, is quietly waiting to be retold. You push open the wooden door that leads to the outer courtyard, apron still tied around your waist, and step into the early heat of the day. The sun hangs lazily in the pale blue sky, its light glancing off the whitewashed walls and glinting in the brass hinges of the garden gate. You squint toward the narrow alley just beyond where voices and colour already stir. Today is market day. You know this not just because it's Tuesday, but because of the sound, that low, rhythmic pulse of wooden wheels and mule hooves, the bark of merchants warming up their sales pitch, and the perfume of the spice bazaar creeping toward you like an overconfident suitor. You take a deep breath. There it is, roasted sesame, sandalwood, vinegar-soaked cucumbers, and a whiff of amber perfume from that one stall that sells scandalously expensive soap. You toss a linen scarf over your hair, grab a small basket, and head for the gate. A neighbour waves, another offers you a fig, a third tells you you've grown taller, which is objectively untrue, but flattering all the same. You smile, nod, and keep walking. The spice market in Bursa is less of a building and more of a layered experience. It starts as a trickle, a man with a small cart selling dried oregano.
Dried oregano and gossip. Then a few steps further, a woman with trays of rose petals, scooping them with a fan made of lacquered palm leaves. And finally, after weaving past crates of onions, bundles of thyme, and at least one child trying to sell a magic lemon, you reach the heart of it all. Stalls bloom like flowers on either side of the cobbled path, their awnings striped in faded oranges and reds. Burlap sacks open like mouths, spilling over with cumin, coriander, turmeric, and pepper in 10 shades of black. The air hums with haggling, familiar voices rising and falling in practiced banter. You pass your favourite seller, Uncle Haroun, who immediately pretends not to know you. "Ah!" he shouts, to no one in particular. "A vision! The spirit of saffron herself walks among us." You roll your eyes. "Last week I was the ghost of ginger." He grins. "We contain multitudes." You lean on the edge of his stall and run your fingers lightly over a bowl of dried sumac.
It stains your skin faintly red, a dusty reminder of its sharp, lemony tang. Beside it sits a ceramic jar labelled kofta baharata, the official mix for meatballs which no two families agree on. You've heard actual shouting matches over whether marjoram belongs in it. Your household is firmly no. Haroun's stall is a masterpiece of controlled chaos. He's arranged his goods not just by type, but by mood. Soothing spices on one end, chamomile, anise, fennel. Aggressive ones on the other, chili, black mustard, ground horseradish root that once made a visiting merchant sneeze so hard he fell off his stool. You scan for anything unusual, something not in your rack at home. And there it is, tucked behind a jar of celery seed, dried hibiscus petals. Dark red, slightly curled, smelling faintly of sour cherries and old rain. You haven't seen them in months. You raise the jar. "These," Haroun nods, "fresh from Egypt. Got them yesterday." You narrow your eyes. They look dry. He leans forward, lowering his voice, and yet somehow moist with promise. You snort, toss a few coins onto the stall, and drop a generous scoop of the petals into your basket. Historians still argue whether hibiscus was used more as a tea, a dye, or a garnish in Ottoman kitchens. Some records say it was a summertime cooler. Others claim it was a symbol of mourning. You've always just liked the way it makes your drinks look like rubies in a glass. That's enough reason to keep it around. Moving on, you pause at another stall filled with dried citrus, strange roots, and an unlabeled sack that smells like nutmeg, but somehow wronger. You don't ask. Sometimes you don't want to know. There's a whisper of something behind you. A woman in a gold-trimmed veil walks past, and you catch a glimpse of her spice basket, so organized it might qualify as a weapon. Rows of miniature labeled tins stacked like soldiers. Even the scoops are polished. You pretend not to stare. She pretends not to notice. The silent mutual respect of spice queens. You return home with your bounty, hibiscus petals, a small bag of Aleppo pepper, and a decorative scoop you absolutely didn't need, but deeply wanted. Your cousin meets you at the gate and immediately tries to steal the scoop. You swat her hand. Back in the kitchen, you unpack everything gently like treasure. The pepper goes in a spare jar. The scoop finds a proud place on the rack, dangling from a little brass hook you just happened to have installed last week in case of such emergencies. You hold the hibiscus petals in your palm. They're light, almost weightless. You imagine steeping them into tea, staining white cloth, maybe even crafting a new jar label with their deep crimson dye. The possibilities flutter inside your mind like a fan unfolding. And that, of course, is the true joy of the market, not just the spices, but the stories you imagine as you sort, scoop, and store them. The little lies you'll tell about how long you bargained, the small victories of presentation, the thrill of placing a new jar on the rack, even if it means shifting everything else by exactly one finger's width to make room. You pause, adjusting the new pepper jar slightly to the left. Perfect. And just as you're stepping back to admire your work, the bottom shelf creaks. A little drawer slides out all on its own, thanks to a warped wood panel you keep forgetting to fix. It's empty. Or was empty. Nestled inside is a single, strange seed. Round, golden, unfamiliar. You hold it up to the light, a mystery for another day. You tilt the little golden seed in your palm, squinting like a jeweler inspecting a pearl. It doesn't match anything in your collection. Too round for coriander, too pale for mustard, and definitely too solid to be some stray lentil trying to sneak into glory. You glance toward the window where the sun is beginning to slant across the kitchen floor, casting long lines over the mosaic tile. The seed glints faintly, mysterious, mischievous. You grin. You tuck it into the corner of a folded cloth and place it on top of the spice rack like a sacred relic. Later you'll ask around, start with the neighbors, then your uncle, who claims he once tasted every spice in the empire, including something that made his ears ring for a week. But for now, it rests above your kingdom of jars like a crown jewel waiting to be named. Your fingers itch for the next drawer. This one slides out easily, silky smooth from years of use. Inside, nestled in soft linen, is a mix that deserves respect. Clove. If cinnamon is warmth and cardamom is elegance, clove is strength. You can smell it before the drawer's halfway open, rich, sharp, almost medicinal, like a spice with opinions. You pluck one clove from the pile and hold it to your nose, bracing yourself. It's the scent of stewed meats, of winter celebrations, of old aunties telling scandalous stories while pretending to embroider. It's also the scent of dental emergencies, because, let's be honest, someone always kept a few cloves in their apron pocket in case a toothache struck during dinner. That someone in your family is your great-aunt Rabia, who swears it works better than any physician and has been known to wedge one in her molars at the first sign of discomfort. Mid-conversation, mid-meal, mid-wedding toast. Historians still debate whether clove entered the Ottoman kitchen primarily through trade with India or via Arab sailors who brought it up the Red Sea. Either way, once it arrived, it stayed and made itself known. There's a merchant's diary in a museum somewhere that refers to it as the little nail that conquered 10 kingdoms. You glance down at your own collection. The cloves are a little dusty. time to freshen them up. You make a mental note to toast a few on a dry pan later, carefully though. Last time you overdid it, the smell lingered for days, and your cousin accused you of trying to summon ghosts. You slide the drawer shut and reach for your polishing cloth. Today is, after all, the day of the full wipe-down, a sacred ritual observed only when the moon is waxing and the family is distracted enough not to interrupt you. You begin with the knobs, each one different. Some shaped like fruit, others like flowers, one like a suspiciously muscular fish no one claims credit for. You suspect it was your brother's idea of a prank, but it's too useful to remove now. With each gentle wipe, you whisper the name of the spice inside, not out of superstition, though if we're being honest, maybe a little, but because saying the names helps you remember their histories. It turns cleaning into a meditation. Sumac, you say softly, wiping the jar with the pale pink swirl. Marjoram, you murmur, running the cloth over the faded blue tulip. Star anise, you add, as you gently straighten the smallest jar on the top shelf, which has a delicate silver lid that pings like a bell when tapped. You pause in front of the next drawer. It's one of your favorites, not for what it holds, but for the decoration carved along its edges, tiny vines curling around crescent moons. This is the one that holds your grandmother's coriander. Coriander is divisive. Some in your house adore it. Others claim it tastes like soap. There was an actual family meeting about it once, complete with snacks and raised voices. In the end, your grandmother, wise and diplomatic, declared it would stay, but in its own drawer, far from the basil and away from anything delicate. And thus was born what your cousin jokingly called the coriander quarantine zone. You open it carefully. The scent is unmistakable. Citrusy, nutty, just a little wild, like something that wants to be sweet but gets distracted halfway there. You run your fingers through the seeds, feeling the light crunch as they shift. These are fresh, maybe from last season. You'll toast them tonight. You'll grind them into the lamb stew. You'll win points with your uncle who claims no one roasts coriander right anymore, but also forgets how much salt he adds to things. From the kitchen window you catch the scent of jasmine drifting in from the garden. You pause. The smells mingle. Coriander and jasmine, earthy and floral. A strange, not unpleasant blend. You wonder what a perfume would smell like with both. Maybe too bold, maybe perfect. You move on to the next shelf where the more decorative items live, a brass scoop shaped like a swan neck, a tiny blue glass jar with no label and no memory of what it once held, and a carved rosewood box you've never opened because your mother said, "Don't open it unless you mean it." Whatever that means, you pick it up now, tempted. It's heavier than it looks. Inside, you suspect, lies something ancient and powerful, or maybe just dried orange peel. You set it down, just in case. Then comes the drawer of dried herbs. Mint, of course, dried in bundles from your garden, crinkling into feather-light flakes. Thyme with its sharp, smoky scent that seems to demand attention. And oregano, your personal favorite, which clings to everything and makes your hands smell like you've just come back from a mountaintop kitchen run by wizards. You lean close, letting the scent wrap around you. These herbs are humble. No golden threads, no imported jars. Just green leaves, sun-dried on linen cloths, turned every few hours, checked for ants, blessed by sunshine and time. You've done it a dozen times, and still, every batch feels like magic. And somewhere in the midst of all this, the wiped jars, the whispered names, the crumbling leaves, you realize you've created something more than a spice rack. You've made a ritual, a rhythm, a personal, sacred order in a world that changes constantly. You may not control the markets or the weather or your cousin's sudden urge to reorganize the shelves by spice mood, but here, in this square of jars and drawers, you hold steady. You look at your hands, stained faintly yellow from turmeric, speckled green from thyme, lined with powder from cloves and cumin. Hands that sort stir and season. Hands that keep memory alive, one spoonful at a time. And as you shut the final drawer for the day, You do it with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows this isn't just a spice rack. It's a history, a tiny, fragrant, lovingly dusted archive of every woman who stirred a pot before you and everyone who will after. You sit down at the kitchen's low wooden table, wiping your hands on the edge of your apron. A habit you inherited from your mother, who inherited it from hers, and which absolutely no cloth has ever survived. Outside the open window, the grapevine shivers gently in the breeze, its green leaves rustling like soft applause. The scent of lavender from the garden mixes now with the dried oregano on your fingertips. It's not a bad perfume, you think. You glance across the kitchen. The spice rack is now gleaming in the golden afternoon light, every jar back in place, every scoop hanging with just the right angle of casual elegance. You nod to yourself. Today, it looks particularly heroic. You half expect it to wink. Then you remember something, the pomegranate dye incident. It begins, as all good Ottoman kitchen legends do, with something perfectly innocent. A bowl of peeled pomegranate seeds sat by the hearth, destined for syrup, or salad, or perhaps an overambitious rice dish your cousin wanted to experiment with. You were younger, curious, and frankly a little bored. You reached for the bowl with a cloth in hand, meaning to cover it. You missed. The bowl tipped. A cascade of pomegranate rubies spilled across the floor, bouncing like jeweled marbles. You froze. So did the cats. The bowl cracked, and one particularly juicy seed exploded with the kind of velocity usually reserved for military-grade grape shot, right across the front of your grandmother's spice rack, red everywhere. It looked like a crime scene, or a failed fresco, or modern art, depending on who you asked. The stain wouldn't come out. Scrubbing only made it worse. Your mother went quiet. Your grandmother muttered something about creative expression. And you? You panicked and grabbed a jar of dried rose petals, smearing them over the mark in a moment of misguided restoration. Somehow, it worked. Not entirely, of course. The pomegranate stain remained, but now it had texture, depth, a hint of floral drama. Your grandmother leaned in, squinted, and said, "Well, that's new." From then on, that drawer bore a new nickname, the Blossom of Regret. Historians still argue whether Ottoman women actually painted or embellished their spice racks, or if such decoration was reserved for ceremonial boxes, dowry chests, and mosque furniture. But in your kitchen, at least, a spontaneous splash of pomegranate and rose counted as an upgrade. And that's how tradition begins, one accident at a time. Emboldened by your unofficial artistic debut, you began experimenting. You made stencils from dried grape leaves, pressing turmeric paste through them onto the edges of drawers. You painted crescent moons with diluted sumac juice on the inside lids. You even carved a tiny tulip into the corner of the drawer that held saffron, tiny enough that only you knew it was there. Of course, not everyone appreciated your interventions. Your cousin claimed the sumac moons looked like angry eyebrows. Your aunt declared you cannot just season furniture. But when a neighbor came over and asked where you bought your spice rack because it looked positively poetic, you decided your work was done. The funny thing is, even mistakes started to feel like design. A smear of chili paste that wouldn't wash off became a permanent warning label. A cinnamon ring from an overfilled scoop added a touch of shadow under a carved vine, as if it had always been there. And now, years later, your spice rack is a mosaic of intention and accident, memory and invention. A living gallery of the smells, colors, and moods of your kitchen life. You rise from the table and approach the drawer, second from the left. The one that used to be mint, but now holds dried basil because your mother insists mint belongs in a clay jar, not wood. Why? Because you pull it open and inhale. Basil smells different here. It's not the sharp, peppery scent you remember from your neighbor's herb garden. No, this basil is softer, almost vanilla sweet, with an undercurrent of lemon, dried in the shade, turned twice a day, laid over linen soaked in rose water. That was your grandmother's trick. She said it lulled the bitterness into something gentle. You remember her drying it on the windowsill, humming old folk songs while flipping leaves with a goose feather. She claimed the feather made the leaves feel pampered and therefore more flavorful. You're still not sure if that's true, but you use the feather anyway. There's one more drawer that needs your attention today, the secret one, tucked behind the rack itself, not visible unless you know it's there. You discovered it once by accident when you bumped the bottom panel and the wood gave way with a soft click. Inside, a folded piece of parchment, brittle and browned, with a list of herbs and tiny notes beside each. Parsley, good for fish but not arguments. Cinnamon, cures heartbreak if eaten with rice pudding. Fennel, do not trust unless toasted. Anise, makes uncles more agreeable. At first, you thought it was a joke, but over time, you began to see the wisdom in its silly logic. You added to it, scribbled new thoughts in the margins. Sumac, sour truths best delivered with lamb. Rose, powerful in tea, dangerous in revenge. Bay, keeps secrets, best stored with silence. This is your kitchen philosophy now, a mix of culinary and emotional seasoning. The knowledge passed down not through books or proclamations, but through quietly opened drawers, stained fingers, shared stews, and the occasional pomegranate disaster. You tuck the parchment back into its hiding spot and press the panel closed. It snaps into place with a quiet satisfaction. Outside, the sky has deepened. The light filtering into the kitchen has turned amber, warm and lazy. Somewhere down the road, you hear a flute playing. The neighbour boy again, practicing the same 4 notes he's been playing for 3 years. Maybe this year he'll learn the 5th. You pour yourself a glass of water infused with dried rose and a sliver of lemon peel. It tastes like memory. You sit back down at the table and raise the glass to your spice rack. Well, you whisper, not bad for a day's work. And in the silence that follows, you swear the drawer with the painted tulip creaks just slightly, as if in agreement. You wake early the next morning, before the cats have even started their usual rooftop patrol. The air is cool for once, still holding the last sigh of night. No clinking of copper pans yet, no footsteps on the stairs, no distant shouting from the bread cellar, just silence and the subtle, familiar creak of the old wooden floor beneath your feet as you step into the kitchen. It feels different at this hour. The light hasn't yet touched the courtyard tiles, and the shadows make the spice rack look taller, older, almost like a doorway. You don't turn on a lamp. You prefer this twilight stillness. It feels like the rack is holding its breath, waiting for the day to begin. You kneel in front of the bottom shelf. The mystery seed is still resting on its linen napkin right where you left it. You pick it up again, turning it slowly between your fingers. It's a little shinier now, as if it's absorbed the warmth of the room. What are you? You wonder. A new spice? A gift from a travelling cousin, a rogue apricot pit disguised as something more exciting? You set it aside for now. Today's task is inventory, and not just of what's in the rack, but of what isn't. You pull out a small leather-bound notebook from the drawer above the sugar crock. The cover's faded, and the pages are stained with generations of cumin fingerprints and cardamom smudges. This is the book. Every house has one. A handwritten, ever-changing record of spice stock, usage, preferences, and the occasional doodle of a particularly aggressive pepper. You flip to the most recent page. Current status. Cumin, half jar, still strong. Cardamom, running low. Note to toast before use. Saffron, enough for 3 dishes or 1 dramatic flex. Rose petals, dry, brittle, refresh with steam. Nutmeg, 1 whole, 1 suspicious half. You jot down a few updates, circling the saffron line 3 times just for drama. It's not just a list, it's a quiet confession of your kitchen habits. Each jar tells on you. Too much allspice? Probably that winter when you tried to make those cakes with no recipe and only ambition. Low on dried dill? That week when your cousin's fish phase turned into a household crisis. The rack keeps records even when you don't. You flip to the back page, the one with the running list of dream spices, ones you've heard about, read about, maybe even seen once in a merchant's cart before they vanished behind a curtain like an Ottoman magician. Dream list: dried lotus root, Persian black lime, smoky Aleppo chili flakes, cinnamon bark curls, not sticks, sumac berries, whole, not crushed, mastic, shaped like pearls, something called silk spice, maybe mythical. You sigh wistfully, then close the book. You reach for the nutmeg drawer and smile at the weight of the round little nut resting inside. You shake it gently. It sounds like a secret. You remember reading once that in 16th century Istanbul, nutmeg was so valuable it was kept in locked drawers and only grated with tiny golden tools. You don't have golden tools. You have a slightly dented copper grater that you love like a second cousin. You retrieve the grater from the utensil tin and start shaving the nutmeg over a cloth. The scent rises immediately, warm, almost buttery, with a hint of eucalyptus. It smells like winter morning spiced milk and your mother's storytelling voice. Once upon a time, she used to say, nutmeg was believed to keep away the plague. She'd pause, then add, it doesn't. But it does keep away boring food. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman belief in nutmeg's medicinal powers was based on Greek sources, Arab texts, or just the fact that everything tastes better with it. Some say it cured headaches, others say it made you dream of flying. You've never flown in your sleep, but you have once dreamed you were an almond. That probably counts. After grating the small pile, you wrap it in waxed cloth and tuck it into your spice drawer marked for special stews. That drawer has no official name, but you know it by touch. Smooth on the outside, slightly warped inside, like a bowl made by a potter having a bad day. Now you check the tiny jar labelled Za'atar, a wild thyme blend that tastes like someone bottled a mountainside. This one you use sparingly, not because it's rare, but because it reminds you too strongly of the time your cousin Fatma tried to invent a new bread dip and nearly caused a household revolt. Za'atar deserves better than being mixed with vinegar, yogurt, and overconfidence. You stir the contents with a miniature wooden spoon. It smells like pine and pepper, like wind and campfires. You mentally mark it for the evening meal, maybe over grilled eggplant, maybe over flatbread brushed with olive oil. You'll decide later. One jar catches your eye, an unlabeled tin battered dull.
You don't even remember what's inside. You pry it open. Inside is salt, but not just any salt. It's grey, clumped, mixed with something herby. You pinch a bit and taste. Rosemary? No. Maybe sage. It's old, but still potent. You remember now, it was a failed experiment, an attempt at herbed finishing salt for roasted potatoes. No one liked it, but no one threw it away either. That's the rule in Ottoman kitchens. Nothing dies. Everything becomes a backup plan. You close the lid, mark it questionable salt, and slide it back onto the shelf where it will continue its long and mysterious life. At the very back of the spice rack, nestled between a jar of pickling spice and a small wooden bowl of dried marigold petals, you find an envelope. A paper envelope, old, sealed, slightly bent. You freeze. You've seen this before, last winter. You'd found it tucked behind a row of empty jars and decided, in a rare moment of restraint, not to open it.
Your grandmother's handwriting curled across the front. When you've made something worth remembering, you'd laughed at the time. Then you forgot about it. But now, you hold it in both hands and sit down slowly. Your hands tremble as you break the wax. Inside is a recipe. Written in ink, slightly smudged, decorated with little vines drawn around the edges, it reads, memory bread, dried figs, sliced fine, 2 spoonfuls of cumin, 1 of anise, a palm of crushed rose petals, almond flour, a secret you whisper to the dough while kneading. You stare at the final line for a long time. You whisper your secret. You start to bake. The kitchen grows warmer as the dough comes together. Sticky at first, then obedient, then comforting. You knead it gently on the broad wooden table, flour dust rising in little clouds that catch the sunlight now beginning to stream through the window. Your hands move without much thought. They know this rhythm, this give and pull, this language spoken in pressure and patience. The recipe is oddly simple, almost suspiciously so. No yeast, no oil, just ground almonds, dried figs, spices, and trust. You hum quietly as you work, something your grandmother used to hum when cooking, a tune that has no real name, only a flavor. The scent of anise rises first, sharp and sweet. It mixes with the earthy cumin and the floral notes of the crushed rose petals you tucked into the mix with quiet reverence. The dough is laced with memory now, with gestures handed down over generations. And a secret, yours. Whispered, with lips barely parted, tucked into the sticky center of the loaf like a folded note. The oven is already warm, a brick-lined dome that radiates heat like an old friend. You place the shaped loaf onto a tray dusted with semolina and slide it in carefully. It sizzles faintly, just enough to let you know it heard you. You sit back on your heels and wipe your hands, glancing at the spice rack like it might wink again. It doesn't. But it does seem to glow a little more confidently now, basking in the scent of something new, something ancient, something yours. While the bread bakes, you pull out the drawer of peppercorns. Now here's a drawer that could start an argument in any kitchen, from Bursa to Baghdad. You run your fingers across the lids of each jar in the pepper section. Black peppercorns, coarse and smoky. White pepper, smoother, more refined. A pepper that wears silk slippers. Green pepper, tangy and herbaceous. And long pepper, gnarled, twisted like little spice wands. Each has its use, each has its fan club. Your household, like many, remains bitterly divided. Your cousin Fatma swears by black pepper for everything. She once added it to rice pudding just to see. Spoiler, we saw. Your uncle prefers white pepper for eggs, claiming it's gentler on his digestion, though evidence suggests it's just harder for him to see in the dish, and he likes surprises. Your personal favourite is long pepper, not because it tastes better, but because it looks like it came from a fairy tale forest and smells like mystery and old parchment. You select a few pieces and crack them in your brass mortar. The scent fills the kitchen immediately, strong and almost citrusy. You add a pinch to the honey glaze waiting in a small copper bowl. This will be brushed over the bread once it's baked, giving it that golden sheen your grandmother used to call the shine of memory. Historians still argue whether long pepper was truly a staple in the average Ottoman kitchen or reserved for royal dishes. Some say it fell out of favor with the rise of chili peppers. Others insist it lingered in quiet corners of the empire, cherished by stubborn grandmothers who refused to move on. You like to think your kitchen is one of those corners. You place the cracked pepper back on the rack and step outside for a moment, just long enough to pick a small sprig of basil and a few petals from the rose bush that leans dramatically into the courtyard, as if it too is always listening. The cats follow you, mewing like you owe them a rent payment in sardines. You do not. Back inside, the scent of baking bread hits you like a childhood memory you didn't know you'd forgotten. Fig and spice and warmth. You close your eyes. The anise sharpens at the edges, the cumin deepens, and the rose weaves through it all like ribbon through hair. You pull the bread from the oven carefully. The crust has cracked ever so slightly, revealing the dark interior dotted with softened fig. You brush the peppered honey glaze over the top in long strokes. It glistens, it glows, you let it rest. You turn, absently wiping your hands on your apron again, and notice something on the spice rack. A new jar, small, squat, lidded in copper. You didn't put it there. You walk over slowly. It's nestled between the cinnamon and the clove, exactly where you would have put it had you known it existed. The label is handwritten, faded but legible. Silk spice. You blink, you open it. Inside is a pale, translucent powder that smells like... how do you even describe it? Like sandalwood and milk, like warm fabric and dried pears, like the inside of a cedar chest someone once cried into. It's beautiful. You touch just a pinch to your tongue. The taste is soft, elusive. It vanishes almost instantly like a dream sliding off your pillow. You glance around the kitchen. It's empty, quiet. And yet, somehow you know you're not alone, not in the ghostly way, in the memory way. You can feel your grandmother here, feel the generations of women who whispered to dough, who rearranged jars after midnight, who left unlabeled tins for curious fingers to discover. You place the new jar back on the rack. You'll ask your mother about it later, or maybe you won't. You sit down at the table with your warm loaf of memory bread and a small copper cup of rose tea. You tear off a piece, steam rising, and take a bite. It tastes like home, like laughter over stew, like old drawers and new secrets, like everything you didn't write down but somehow remembered anyway. You wake late the next morning, and it takes a few hazy seconds to remember why everything smells so good. Then it hits you, fig bread. The memory comes back in taste, sweet, spiced, and warm. You stretch, roll to your side, catch the faintest scent of rose and long pea, and long pepper still lingering on your fingertips. You laugh softly into your pillow. In the kitchen, the loaf rests on the table, half-eaten and gloriously sticky. Crumbs trail across the cloth like tiny footprints. Someone, probably your cousin, has taken a bite directly from the middle. Barbarism. You make a mental note to glare at her later. But the real surprise sits right where you left it. The silk spice jar, still closed, still mysterious. You lift it again. It has weight now, not physical but emotional, like it's become part of the house overnight. You consider tasting it again, but stop yourself. That's not a breakfast spice. That's a thinking spice, a remembering spice. Instead, you head for the spice rack's central column, the heart of the operation. And there, standing like little generals, are your most used blends. The first is your all-purpose seasoning: thyme, sumac, salt, dried onion flakes, and a single bay leaf that's somehow always whole. You sprinkle it into stews, onto flatbread, into your uncle's tea when he annoys you. He swears it helps with moral clarity. The second is the guest blend, equal parts safe and impressive. A little nutmeg, cinnamon, rose sugar, and crushed pistachio. It smells like a wedding and makes everyone think you spent 3 times as long on the dish as you did. You use it only when you want to be praised, but not interrogated. And the third? The spice of mischief. This one changes constantly. Today it contains dried lemon zest, clove dust, mint, and... is that safflower? You're not sure. You think your cousin snuck it in. You've caught her once or twice, hovering over the rack, muttering under her breath like a potion master. Her blends rarely make sense, but this one works. You take a small pinch and press it into your palm. The colours are lovely, like confetti made of dried garden. You brush it into your apron pocket just in case inspiration strikes. Historians still debate the use of household spice blends in Ottoman daily life. Were they rigid recipes passed down through generations, or fluid creations moulded by memory, mood, and moment? The answer, you suspect, is both. Because sometimes tradition is a script, and sometimes it's improv performed over a bubbling stew pot with 3 nosy relatives and no measuring spoons. You glance toward the small shelf above the rack, the one where the decorative scoops hang. They're not just utensils, they're trophies. There's the wide brass scoop you bartered for with a neighbour in exchange for babysitting her parrot. It bit you 4 times. The silver one you inherited from your grandmother, etched with lilies. The carved olive wood one you bought for too many coins because the merchant smiled at you and said it looked like it belonged in your story. You didn't know what he meant. You bought it anyway. 1 scoop is missing. You frown, scan the table. Not there. Not in the sink either. You finally spot it wedged between 2 jars, a little bone-handled scoop with a cracked lip. The troublemaker's scoop, always disappearing. You retrieve it gently, and something falls out behind it, a thin roll of cloth tied with gold thread. You pause. This you've never seen. You untie it slowly, unrolling it like an old map. Inside, 4 tiny bundles of herbs. each wrapped in waxed paper and labelled in a spidery hand you don't recognise. 1. Crushed sage and myrtle for foggy mornings. 2. Dried lemon balm and fig leaf for uncertain guests. 3. Lavender and coriander seed for dreams. 4. A single black seed, no label. The black seed sits alone, small and glossy. You resist the urge to touch it. There's a feeling about it, like the golden seed from before but deeper, older, not menacing exactly, just important. You place it on the cloth and fold it back up, slower this time. You don't need to use it. Not yet. But you'll keep it close. The spice rack has always had its stories. Now apparently it keeps secrets too. Later, while making a light midday stew, you reach for the thyme jar and find it half full. Not surprising, it's the backbone of everything, but today it smells different, sharper, more confident. You stir it into the pot and watch the herbs swirl, tiny green flecks dancing like sparks across the surface. You think again of the silk spice. You haven't touched it since yesterday, but it's there in your mind now every time you season something, every time you sniff a jar and ask, what are you missing? It's like the spice itself whispered, pay attention. So you do. You taste more carefully. You adjust without fear. You add a single rose petal to the stew, not traditional, but it works. You pour a spoonful into a dish and carry it outside to cool. Sitting in the courtyard, bowl in hand, cats circling like they know something sacred has been cooked. You take a bite. It's not perfect, but it's yours. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you'll try again, because a spice rack is never finished. It's only ever in progress. You decide, quite suddenly, that the spice rack needs a new drawer. Not because you're out of space, though the oregano is starting to eye the coriander's jar a little too aggressively, but because something in the kitchen's rhythm has changed lately. It's subtle, like a shift in the way the sunlight lands on the tiles, or the way the cinnamon smells at dusk. You can feel it. So you stand before the rack, hands on your hips, scanning for a gap. The rack itself is old, sturdy, lovingly overstuffed. It's grown like a tree, jars added over time, drawers adapted for new blends, hooks installed at odd angles to accommodate fancy spoons, or one-off scoops that looked better than they worked. You kneel and tap along the underside, counting heartbeats between each hollow thunk. There. Just to the right of the preserved lemon jar, a knot in the wood that might give. You press. It doesn't open, you press again. Still, no, you sigh, fetch a spoon from the counter, and gently wedge it beneath the panel. With a faint creak, one that sounds suspiciously like a sigh of resignation, it pops open. A hollow space, exactly drawer-sized. You blink. Did you know this was here? Maybe, maybe not. Kitchens forget things too. You bring out a small plain wooden box from the pantry shelf, just the right size to tuck into the space. You clean it with vinegar, line it with a bit of old embroidered linen, and then pause. What will this drawer be? Not mint, not cinnamon, not any of the practical, noisy spices. No, this drawer will be for the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones that do their work in the background, whispers rather than shouts. You gather your candidates like old friends returning home. Dried lemon balm, faint, floral, calming. Angelica root, earthy, pale, smells like clean snow. Bay leaf crumbs, the pieces too small to float in soup, but too fragrant to throw away. Charred rosemary tips, accidental discoveries from the time you roasted them too long and created a new form of incense. A pinch of ground fennel, not the main note in anything, but without it, everything tastes like a secret missing its key. You blend them softly in a bowl, using the bone-handled scoop you rescued the day before. It feels like a ritual, not one anyone taught you, just one that emerged, as all good rituals do, from instinct and repetition. You pour the blend into the drawer and press it closed. There's no label, just a little brass star screwed into the handle. You smile, you'll know which one it is. Historians still argue whether Ottoman women passed down spice blends formally, like heirlooms, or informally, through gestures and taste memory. Some say there were recipe books written in the margins of Qurans or stitched into the hems of aprons. Others insist it was all oral, nothing written, only repeated. You suspect it was both, because some truths need paper and some only live in the hands that stir the pot. You turn back to the kitchen and start your afternoon prep. There's rice soaking in the corner bowl. You'll make it with currants and pine nuts today. You reach for the cinnamon jar, pause, and grab the nutmeg instead. A small rebellion. You add cardamom too, just enough to raise an eyebrow from someone nosy. While the rice cooks, you brew tea. Not the usual kind. Today you want something light. You open your new drawer, the quiet drawer, and take a tiny scoop of the blend you just made. The scent hits you like a breeze in a cedar grove. You smile. Into the teapot it goes, steeping in silence. Your cousin enters the kitchen, raises an eyebrow at the steam. That smells like a forest? Good, you reply without explaining. She leans in to sniff. What's in it? You sip. Something that doesn't ask for attention. The rice is ready. You fluff it with a fork and fold in the currants. A dash of your new drawer blend over the top. Why not? It's quiet but confident.
Like the woman in her.
The woman you're slowly becoming. Later, after the dishes are stacked and the cousins have disappeared into the garden with leftover fig bread, you wipe down the counter and return to the spice rack. You run your fingers along each jar and drawer, your touch now so familiar that you can feel the smallest shifts. The loosened lid, the sticky hinge, the spoon hung at a slightly odd angle. You fix them gently, wordlessly. You don't have to think anymore. Your hands know, and then your fingers stop. The silk spice jar, still unopened since yesterday. You pick it up. It's warm, like it's been waiting. You open it. Inside, the powder has settled into the tiniest folds and craters, like the surface of a pale moon. You dip your little spoon and lift just a whisper of it to your tongue. This time, it tastes different. Soft, yes, but now with something else. Almost like memory made edible. You think of your grandmother's voice, the way your mother touches the side of the bowl when she stirs, the way you lean into the spice rack at night when no one's watching, just to inhale the quiet. You place the jar back gently. Then, without thinking, you reach for a scrap of parchment and a dull charcoal pencil. You write, silk spice drawer idea, for stories not yet told, for recipes not yet invented, for days that feel like dreams. You fold the note and slip it under the rack, next to the golden seed, which you still haven't planted. You will. Soon, maybe. Or maybe it will grow all on its own. It's a day of rearrangement. Not the dramatic, furniture-moving kind, more the quiet shift of spoons and jars, the tug of a shelf liner here, the tightening of a knob there. You're not even sure why you woke up with the urge, but it's undeniable. Something about the rack has been whispering almost right for days now, and today you decide to listen. You begin with the top row. These are the power players: cinnamon, sumac, dried mint, paprika, cumin. The frequent flyers? The flavors you reach for without thinking. Their jars are stout and dependable, with chipped lids that click in place like clockwork. But something feels off. Maybe it's the way the cumin jar casts a shadow over the rose petals, or the way the mint's label has started to curl at the edge, giving it a nervous look. You pick them up, one by one, dust their bottoms, wipe down the shelf with a cloth dipped in vinegar and lemon oil. The scent is bright and stings your eyes, but it feels like a cleansing. You swap cumin and paprika. You lower mint to the second shelf, closer to the herbal blends. Cinnamon stays where it is because cinnamon refuses to move for anyone, and rightly so. Once, your aunt tried replacing cinnamon with galangal in a rice pudding. The family still refers to it as the dish that shall not be named. Your grandmother wrote a poem mocking it and slipped it under her door. Historians still argue whether paprika played a central role in Ottoman cuisine, or was just a borrowed Hungarian accent that crept in slowly. But here in your kitchen, paprika gets prime placement. Smoky, warm, just a little dangerous. It's the closest thing your spice rack has to a flirt. You move to the middle shelf. These are the harmonizers: coriander, fennel, star anise, fenugreek. Subtler, more particular. Fennel is getting low again. Probably your fault. You've been adding it to everything lately. Tea, rice, bread, even scrambled eggs, a choice that drew mixed reviews. You don't care. Fennel is gentle and strange, and you like strange things that pretend to be ordinary. The star anise jar is beautiful, but impractical. A tall cylinder with a narrow neck. It's impossible to scoop from. You debate changing the jar, then decide against it. Some things are allowed to be pretty and annoying. It reminds you of your cousin Melek, who insists she's very low maintenance while applying her rosewater toner with a silver spoon. You reach the shelf of mysteries. The jars here are less frequently used, not unloved, just more ceremonial. Dried orange blossom, pickled pepper seeds, crystallized ginger you made 2 years ago during a sugar phase. Some of them are almost forgotten, buried behind newer, louder arrivals. You pull each one forward, one by one, letting them breathe. You find the jar of crushed marigold petals. You'd almost forgotten it. Pale gold, light as lace. You open it and sniff. Faintly bitter, almost metallic, like the smell of sunlight on stone. You remember reading once that marigold was used to dye cloth in parts of the empire. Your mother tried it on a pillowcase. It came out the color of regret. Still, it deserves space. You place it next to the safflower, which looks similar but tastes like a whispery cousin to chili. The two jars seem pleased to see each other. Then comes the matter of labels. Some of yours are fading. Others are smudged. One, written in your cousin's handwriting, simply says, you decide it's time to redo them. You pull out your label drawer, yes, that's a thing, and retrieve a stack of fresh parchment scraps, a little pot of ink and your best nib pen. The tip scratches gently against the paper as you work. Your handwriting is not elegant, but it is honest. You label each jar with care. Sumac, tangy red, judgmental mint, calm in theory, chaos in tea fennel, persistent and misunderstood rose petals, romantic until overused. You consider labeling cinnamon divine, unquestionable, eternal, but you settle for cinnamon. If you know, you know. You tie each label to its jar with cotton thread, looped twice for luck. The spice rack looks refreshed. It's not a transformation, it's a deep breath, a subtle shifting of shoulders, a more honest version of itself. And then you come to the far right column, the drawer with the crack, the jar with the mystery blend, the one labelled not for guests. You made that one on a dare from your uncle after he said your stews were pleasantly safe. Inside, ground chili, dried garlic, black sesame, powdered lime, a hint of sumac and something else. You forget what. It tastes like a warning. You've only used it twice. Once on roasted chickpeas, once on grilled lamb. Both times someone cried. One of those times it was you. You consider tossing it, but then again, it's part of the story. You tighten the lid and tuck it back into its corner. You find yourself staring again at the silk spice jar. You haven't opened it since that second taste. You're afraid that if you try it again, it might change. Or worse, it won't. You take it down from the top shelf and carry it to the window. Outside, the cats are stretched in a patch of sun, twitching in their dreams. The grapevines flutter, the breeze smells like early afternoon. Warm tiles, dust, and parsley from someone else's kitchen. You sit and open the jar, you dip the spoon, and this time, instead of tasting it, you just hold it beneath your nose. Inhale, it smells like quiet afternoons and clean rooms. Like almond soap and the soft rustle of a grandmother's sleeves. Like something older than memory, but newer than language. You smile. You won't use it today. You close the jar and slide it onto the new drawer you added this morning. The one for the quiet spices. The ones that wait. The ones that understand timing better than you do. And as you do, you notice something small on the shelf behind it. A note, folded once, tied with thread. You hesitate. You open it. It says, "You're doing it right. Don't rush the next part." No signature. But somehow, you know exactly who wrote it. You don't say anything. You just sit there on the kitchen floor, legs folded beneath you, note in hand, breath paused mid-thought. There's no signature. But the handwriting, it's the kind your grandmother used when labeling jams, the slanted cursive with looped G's and dramatic T crossings that always made her grocery lists look like royal decrees. You turn the note over. Blank on the back, still warm from wherever it had been waiting. You set it beside the silk spice jar, not quite ready to tuck it away. Let it breathe first. Let it exist. Some notes need time before they're folded forever. A breeze moves through the open window, tugging at the linen curtains like a cat pouring a friend awake. Outside, someone starts humming a lullaby. You're not sure if it's a neighbor or just your memory playing tricks again. Either way, it fits. You stand slowly, stretch your arms overhead, and glance toward the hanging herb bundles above the stove. They need attention. The mint has dried to a crisp. The thyme is crumbling with pride, but the basil is still clinging to its youth. Leaves dark green at the base, fading to dusty olive at the tips. You unhook the bundle, carry it to the table, and begin stripping the leaves gently into a bowl. Basil has a smell that defies mood. Can be romantic, nostalgic, energizing, or melancholy depending on the time of day and the person sniffing it. Right now it smells like closure. As you work, you remember the basil smuggling auntie. Every family has one. Yours was Aunt Nesrin. Petite, wide-eyed, always slightly out of breath from activities no one could ever confirm. The family legend goes like this. Sometime in her early 20s, she travelled to Alexandria, came back with a hair brooch larger than her entire hand and refused to speak about what happened. A year later, basil started growing behind the house. Not just any basil, Egyptian sweet basil, the kind no one had ever managed to grow here before. She claimed it blew in on the wind, but someone, years later, found a folded bit of parchment inside the brooch hinge, a single seed pressed between pages, dried flat, still fragrant. The story changes every time it's told. Some versions involve romance, others espionage. Once your uncle suggested it was part of an international culinary heist, but everyone agrees on two things. Things. Aunt Nesrin never explained, and that basil grew for 23 years in the same soil without once failing. You scoop the dried leaves into a jar, label it Nesrin's basil with a pencil. Smile. Historians still argue whether basil held any real culinary prestige in the Ottoman court, or if it was relegated to the herb gardens of quieter households. But what's certain is this: no woman with a spice rack ever took basil for granted. Too stubborn, too unpredictable, too fragrant to ignore. You return to the rack, placing the new jar in the middle row, slightly offset so it doesn't block the light from hitting the lavender jar. That's important. Lavender likes the sun. Then your eye catches the little ledger again, the lavender-laced one. You slide it from the shelf with two hands as if it might break. Its cover is soft from time and handling, the edges nibbled by time. It smells like pages and petals, and maybe a little clove from where it was stored too close to the pickling spices. You open it to a random page. There, in tight, looping script, is a recipe. Summer pudding for restless sleepers. 3 spoons of rose sugar. 2 dried figs, diced, a splash of vinegar. Trust me. Crushed coriander, lavender water, steeped exactly 7 minutes. Whisper something you regret into the batter, stir clockwise. Bake until the top browns like your uncle's bald spot. Serve with silence, you laugh. The last line is underlined twice. You don't remember writing this, but it's your ink, your paper. Maybe your cousin added the final joke, or maybe your hand on another day just wanted to make you smile in the future. You tuck the book back in place and reach for the lavender jar. Open it. Inhale. It's fading now, a little dry, a little thin, but still there. You sprinkle some into a dish of hot water and let it sit. watching the petals float like tiny purple boats. You stare at the floating lavender and think about how the spice rack started as a storage solution, became an obsession, a shrine, a diary, and now a map of every emotion you've ever cooked through: anger, sadness, triumph, boredom, curiosity, and the quiet kind of joy that only comes from perfectly stacked ceramic. And like any good map, it changes. You pull out the tiny tin that once held orange peel. It's empty now. You decide it will become your new inspiration tin, a place for forgotten blends, the ones you only tried once, the ones that didn't quite work but didn't quite fail, the almosts. You open the Not for Guests drawer again, take a pinch of the chili lime garlic chaos and drop it into the tin, just a little, for memory. Then a bit of saffron salt that's too fancy for daily use, a crumble of burnt mint. You add a petal of dried rose,
A flake of cinnamon bark. It smells like too much, like not enough, like the beginning of something. You seal the lid, label it only with a question mark. Place it near the silk spice. Sometimes drawers don't need names. They need time. By late afternoon, the light in the kitchen turns the colour of apricots, that warm, syrupy gold that stretches shadows and softens edges. The spice rack glows, not metaphorically, literally. The sun catches the mother-of-pearl inlays, the glint of brass knobs, the translucent edges of dried petals inside clear jars. You stand still and watch it, as if it might decide to speak, and maybe it does in its own way. You pour yourself a glass of water with a sliver of lemon and a few crushed mint leaves from the new jar, Nesrin's basil sitting proudly behind it like a dignified guest at a garden party. The flavours are bright, clean, and a little playful.
You take a sip and let your eyes wander across the drawers. Your gaze lands on one you almost never open anymore. The wedding spice drawer. It's labelled in calligraphy, flourished and romantic. The ink is slightly smudged from the time your cousin spilled rose syrup on it and tried to blame the cat. Inside you keep the spices traditionally used in wedding feasts, or so the story goes. Cinnamon sticks, whole cloves, star anise, and a crumbled bundle of dried orange blossom wrapped in gauze and tied with a gold ribbon. You suspect half of this was never actually used in any wedding, but was meant for one that never quite happened. You open it, slowly. The scent rises up like memory, stirred with a ladle. You remember your eldest aunt reciting the tale of her own wedding banquet, how the rice was seasoned with saffron and raisins, the chicken with cinnamon and bitter orange, and how someone in the kitchen accidentally added twice the cloves and half the salt. She swore the guests thought it intentional and called it symbolic. Symbolic of what? Marriage, she said flatly, and everyone nodded like that made perfect sense. Historians still argue whether spices were chosen for symbolic reasons in Ottoman nuptials or simply for flavour and availability, but ask anyone who's cooked for one and they'll tell you the symbolism was baked in whether you meant it or not. You take out one of the cinnamon sticks. It's faded now, edges curled. You remember when it was new, sharp, red-brown, a little dangerous. You scrape its side gently with a paring knife, collecting a few curls to drop into the tea kettle for later. A ritual for no one in particular. You close the drawer and glance at the questionable salt tin again. It's still there, still unloved. You know it's bad. But something about it feels persistent, like an opinion you didn't ask for but can't ignore. You open it, pinch the grey, slightly clumpy mix, and, against better judgment, sprinkle a tiny amount onto a fresh slice of cucumber. You bite. Pause. It's not good, but it is interesting. You nod, close the tin, and write on the lid, caution, possibly useful. You laugh to yourself, then stop laughing because you hear a faint rustling behind you. You turn, nothing. But a drawer, one you didn't touch, is slightly ajar. It's the bay leaf drawer. You kneel. Inside is the usual mess: crumbled leaves, broken stems, a few rogue peppercorns that migrated like bored travellers. But there's something else, a piece of fabric, torn, folded, thin as onion skin. You lift it carefully. It's a scrap of someone's apron, faded blue with tiny tulip embroidery. You know it instantly. Your mother's apron, the one she wore when she taught you how to make herbed rice for the first time. You thought she'd thrown it away years ago after it caught fire slightly during the great bread towel incident. Apparently she tucked a piece of it away. No note, just the cloth. You press it between your palms. And then you do something a little strange. You place the cloth into the silk spice jar, just for a moment. Let it sit in that powdery quiet. Let it collect the scent of stillness and memory. Then you remove it and tuck it into the back of the drawer again. A quiet sort of blessing. A story stitched into the spice rack itself. You rise and turn to the courtyard window. The grape leaves flutter. A breeze catches the edge of the curtain. You notice something outside. A string of dried peppers hanging from the neighbour's laundry line, twisting like dancers in the wind. That reminds you, the pepper garland. Once when you were maybe 10, you'd help string red chilies with your aunt. They'd been drying for days, leathery and wrinkled and violent in colour. You threaded them with a long needle, one by one, until your fingers tingled from the capsaicin, and your aunt gave you a lemon slice to rub on your palms. The garland hung above the doorway for months, warning guests of your aunt's cooking mood. When it finally fell down during a storm, she swept it into a basket and turned it into a spice blend she called Storm Heat. You never found the recipe, but the name stuck. You decide to revive it. You gather a handful of dried chili, a pinch of black pepper, a crumble of rosemary, a few flakes of smoked salt, and just a whisper of ground clove. You grind them by hand, turning the pestles slowly, gently. The scent climbs into your nose and makes your eyes water. You sneeze twice. It's perfect. You pour the blend into a small glass jar with a cork lid and label it Storm Heat. For days that crack open like thunder. You place it next to the silk spice. Let them sit together, the loud and the quiet, fire and fog, side by side. The spice rack looks different now. Not new, just more itself. Like someone who's just remembered an old name they used to answer to. You smile, you wipe your hands, you sit, and you wait for the kettle to sing. The kettle sings. Not loudly, more of a sigh than a song, a whisper of steam that curls around the copper spout and drifts lazily across the kitchen. You rise slowly, as if not to startle it, and pour the hot water into a small ceramic teapot that's been waiting patiently beside the basil jar. Into the pot goes your new blend, a pinch from the quiet drawer, lemon balm, rosemary tips, and the last of the angelica root. It smells like early mornings and polite memories. You add just one petal from the wedding drawer's dried orange blossom, because every tea deserves a touch of theatre. While it steeps, you sit at the low table again and look over your kingdom. The spice rack glows with the calm assurance of someone who knows they're both museum and mystery. You've wiped every shelf, rotated every jar, scolded every crooked label, but now, for the first time, you stop rearranging. You just look. And in that moment, the rack doesn't feel like a kitchen tool at all. It feels like a diary, a collection of attempts, a catalogue of little moments you never meant to save, scents that held hands with seasons, jars that were opened during grief, laughter, heartbreak, boredom. The tea finishes steeping. You strain it into your favourite cup, the one with the uneven rim that makes every sip a guessing game. The taste is soft, bearish, soft, barely there, like the smell of warm fabric. It doesn't impress you, it doesn't surprise you, but it comforts you. And that's the point. As you sip, you think about the one spice you never use, not because it's bad or unfamiliar, but because it's too familiar, the vinegar spice. You call it that, though it's not vinegar at all. It's sumac, sharp and deep and slightly astringent. You've got a whole jar of it, crimson red and fine as dust, tucked in a back corner. You reach for it now and pull it forward. You don't remember buying this batch. You don't remember using it recently. But when you open it, the scent hits you like a memory you hadn't given permission to arrive. It smells like arguments, like sharp words over dinner tables, like recipes gone wrong and pride too strong to admit it. It smells like your mother's warning tone, your aunt's arched eyebrow, the clatter of a spoon dropped too hard into a bowl. It smells like emotion. You cap it quickly, but then you pause. You remember something else. Sumac also smells like your first solo stew, the one you forgot to salt, so you added more and more sumac instead, hoping no one would notice. Your grandfather did, of course, took one bite, paused, then nodded gravely and said, "This stew tells the truth." You didn't understand it then. You do now. You reach for the parchment scraps and ink again. You write sumac for when truth needs a little help. You retie the label and place it back, no longer in the shadowy corner. It goes beside the cumin. Let it live in the light. You start pulling down other jars that haven't seen your fingers in weeks. The coriander with the split lid, the jar of dried lemon rinds, the hibiscus petals that have faded to a dusty maroon but still leave pink trails when steeped. Each gets attention. A dust, a label check, a whispered apology. Then there's the not for guests blend again, still there, still waiting. You don't open it today. You're not feeling dangerous enough. But you pat the lid once, gently, like a sleeping dog. You'll wake it later. You stand back and scan the shelves again. You realize you've slowly been forming color gradients, reds to oranges to golds, greens to browns to the blackest jar on the bottom row. It wasn't intentional, but it looks beautiful now, like a tapestry woven from scent. That gives you an idea. You pull out a fresh sheet of parchment and begin sketching. A map, not of the spice rack, but of the kitchen as a scent journey. You draw the rack first, then lines extending from each jar to the stove, the pantry, the doorway, the table, the herb hooks. For cinnamon, you draw curls spiraling toward the bread drawer. For mint, a path to the kettle. For coriander, a looping circle that ends near the back garden door. You realize you've accidentally designed a floor plan of feeling. You hang the map inside the cabinet door where the cups live. No one will see it but you. That's enough. As the sun begins to shift toward the western window, you return to the quiet drawer. You open it. You take a pinch of the lemon balm blend and sprinkle it on the windowsill. Your grandmother used to do this to please the afternoon, she'd say. No one ever knew what she meant. You don't either. But it feels right. You do the same with a tiny bit of rosemary to wake the shadows. And finally, a crumble of dried sage to seal the light. These aren't rituals you were taught. These are the ones that grew out of instinct, like basil in a pot you forgot to water, but somehow still bloomed. Historians would call this domestic superstition. You call it seasoning the air. And it works. The light seems warmer. The breeze smells slightly sweet. The kitchen exhales. You sit down again, refill your tea, and reach for your notebook. The last entry was yesterday. You turn the page, and at the top you write, "Spices I haven't met yet." You pause, then you write, the kind you use when you're ready to forgive someone. The one for when it rains after a long dry month. The blend that helps you clean without resentment. The scent of someone remembering you fondly. The flavor of deciding you were wrong and smiling anyway. You close the notebook softly. The tea is still warm. The kitchen still quiet. The rack perfectly still. You lean back in your chair and whisper, "That's enough for today." And for once, the spices don't argue. The next morning, before you even open your eyes, you know something has shifted. Not in the earth-shaking storm is coming sort of way, but in the subtle drift of the air through your window. It smells faintly of stone and sun-warmed dust, like the kind of day that hums instead of shouts. The kind of day you save for something important. You stretch, wrap yourself in your robe, and pad across the cool tiles to the kitchen. The spice rack greets you like an old friend leaning against a doorframe, unassuming, full of stories, entirely itself. You nod toward it as you would a person, and for just a second it seems to nod back. You light the morning incense, sandalwood today. It coils upward in thin grey threads, drifting over the rack and curling around the copper hooks like lazy snakes. You open the window just enough to let the breeze stir the smoke without chasing it away. Then you reach for the saffron. It's not low yet, but today feels like a saffron day. You take the jar down with 2 hands like a relic. The lid sticks slightly, as always, and then gives way with a quiet pop. Inside, red gold threads, delicate, curled, powerful. You set the jar beside the stove and measure out just 3 strands, placing them in a small bowl with warm water to bloom. You don't rush this part. You watch them unfurl slowly, the color bleeding like sunrise across white silk. It never gets old. Historians still argue whether saffron was prized more for its culinary, medicinal, or symbolic uses in the Ottoman world. It was used in rice, in perfume, in ink, in love spells. Some said it made the skin glow. Others said it stirred the heart. Your grandmother once said it kept conversations honest. She also said it was too expensive for soup, so who knows? You lift the saffron bowl to your nose. It smells like heat, not temperature, emotion, confidence, ambition, a slightly theatrical kind of joy. You decide to make pirinç pilava, rice with saffron, almonds, and a handful of dried currants that have been sulking in the pantry all month. It's a simple dish, but today it deserves your best. You rinse the rice slowly, fingers swirling in the bowl until the water runs clear. You toast the almonds in a dry pan, watching as they darken just enough to smell like memory. Then the currants, soaked in rosewater. They plump up like secrets swelling with pride. You heat the ghee in the pan, stir the rice until it crackles, pour in the water with saffron, and then cover the pot. You don't leave. You sit beside it, waiting, like it's a story you've heard before, but want to see how it ends this time. While it simmers, you turn your attention to the spice rack. Again, you're not adjusting anything today, just checking in. The silk spice jar sits exactly where it was yesterday, unopened, undisturbed. But now, something else sits beside it, a folded scrap of paper with your name on it. Not in your handwriting. You freeze. You look around. The window is closed. The door still locked. You open the note. You don't need to use everything at once. Let the flavors rest. You too. It's unsigned. But the handwriting is familiar. A cousin? An aunt? Your mother? You smile without knowing why. You tuck the note under the silk spice jar and reach for the coriander. You grind it fresh, just a little. The scent fills the room instantly, warm, citrusy, full of confidence. You mix it into a spoonful of yogurt, taste it, nod. This is how your mornings go now, quietly strange, quietly sacred. You begin laying out your afternoon plan. You'll restock the sumac, polish the brass scoop handles, maybe repaint the little floral motif that's flaking off the paprika drawer. It's been years since you first painted it there, using leftover dye from a pomegranate experiment. It turned out so beautifully by accident that you've never dared to touch it again. But now it needs you. Time has had its say. You mix a little water, a dab of beet powder, a drop of lemon juice, and stir it into a new paint. You test it on paper first, and when you're satisfied, you crouch down beside the drawer and gently retrace the petals. Your hand is steadier than it used to be. When you finish, you sit back and admire your work. The pattern glows in the sunlight, subtle, imperfect, beautiful, just like everything else in the kitchen. The rice finishes cooking. You fluff it gently, each grain golden, fragrant, studded with almonds and currants like gems in sand. You plate it in the wide ceramic bowl with the chip on one edge, the one you always use for special dishes, because its flaw makes the beauty stand out more. You place the bowl on the table and sit beside it, alone for now, but not really. The spice rack watches. The notes tucked behind drawers listen. The silk spice waits, as always. You eat slowly, each bite a blend of past effort and present pleasure. The saffron lingers on your tongue like the warmth of sunlight through stained glass. You close your eyes and breathe. And then you hear it. A faint knock. Not on the door. From inside the kitchen. You turn. One drawer, your new one, the quiet drawer, has popped open ever so slightly. Inside, something glints. You rise, you walk over, and you smile. Because resting right on top of the lemon balm and bay leaf is a tiny, carved spoon you've never seen before. Shaped like a tulip, inlaid with mother of pearl. No explanation, just a gift. You lift it in your hand, it fits perfectly. You turn the little spoon over in you.
Over in your hand, it's no longer than your thumb, delicately carved, feather-light. The mother of pearl inlay catches the light just right, flashes of pink, green, and the faintest swirl of lavender beneath the surface. You trace the tulip shape at the end of the handle with your thumb. It's familiar, not like something you've held before, but like something that belongs. Like it grew here. You don't ask where it came from. In this kitchen, things arrive when they're needed. Answers are optional. You cradle the spoon and glance at the spice rack. The drawer it emerged from, the quiet one, is now perfectly closed again, as if nothing had ever stirred. You smile and walk to the rack, gently placing the spoon in the tiny groove beside the silk spice jar. A place of honor, of mystery, of gentle arrivals. Then you reach for the fennel. You haven't used it in a few days, and that feels wrong. You crack the lid.
That sweet, anise bright scent rises up, coating the air like a note held too long in a quiet room. You close your eyes. You remember your grandmother's habit of chewing fennel seeds after every meal, not because she needed to, but because she liked the way it reminded her that dinner was done and life was moving forward. She used to offer you a pinch from a little glass dish, always the same words. To carry the flavor forward, you grind a few seeds and drop them into a small bowl with a pinch of sugar. A post-lunch treat for no one in particular. Maybe just for the air. The cats slink in from the courtyard, tails high, eyes watchful. They sniff around the kitchen, as if also sensing something new. One hops onto the windowsill and stares at the rack. You follow her gaze. You notice a faint crack in one of the bottom drawers, the one that holds the rose petals. You kneel, open it gently. The petals are still there, pale and curling at the edges like pages of an old book. But beneath them, tucked between folds of gauze, is another scrap of fabric, different from the one before. This one is deep green, embroidered with gold thread in a swirling pattern. You don't recognize it. You lift it carefully. Wrapped inside is a tiny slip of parchment. You open it. There's a spice for sorrow. You've already used it. You stare, you reread. You don't cry, but your chest gets quiet in that particular way, like someone just closed a book you weren't ready to finish. You fold the note again, slower this time, and press it between the pages of your ledger. Let it live there, between lists and daydreams, between coriander shortages and fig surplus. It fits. You sit at the table, stare into your cup of fennel sugar, and think about what spice you reach for when you're grieving. Not weeping, but grieving, in that silent, daily kind of way, the kind that colors the corners of a day. You think back, and you realize it's bay. Bay leaf added quietly to the pot, tucked beneath louder flavors. It doesn't demand attention, it just lingers, it deepens, it watches over the other spices. It doesn't need thanks. You go to the rack, open the bay drawer, touch the leaves one by one. You whisper, "Thank you." Then you do something you've never done. You take a whole bay leaf, not crumbled, not bruised, and you write on it. With the charcoal pencil you keep for labels, you write, "Grief, softened." You place it in a clean jar, separate from the rest. No spices, no blends, just that one leaf. You tie a piece of thread around the jar neck and set it at the very top of the rack, above the saffron. Not to be used, just to be known. Historians rarely write about this part. The small rituals. The single spoon that means, "I'm still here." The way a rack can become a memorial and still be a tool. The way a kitchen can be holy without ceremony. You lean back in your chair, hands resting on your lap. Outside, the wind picks up, rustling the herbs drying by the window. The lavender sways, the thyme hangs still. And then you hear a knock, a soft one, not from the front door, from the cupboard above the stove, the one you haven't opened in years. Your heart taps once in response. You stand, you open it. Inside, dust, a stack of unused saucers, and something folded in linen. Your breath catches. You know this cloth. You unwrap it. Inside is a jar, hand-thrown, unglazed, with a wooden lid tied shut with waxed string. There's no label. You untie the string, open it. Inside, powder, pale orange, fragrant and sweet. You dip your finger, taste, dried apricot, cinnamon, orange peel, and something else. Something you can't name. You sit again. You don't write this one down. You place it quietly in the center of the rack. No label, no name, just the knowledge that it exists, that someone once made it and someone saved it, and now it waits with the others. You close your eyes. You breathe. You whisper, "Welcome back." You don't move for a while. You sit there in the fading afternoon light, fingers still resting lightly on the jar with no name, watching as the dust dances in the golden air like it knows a story you haven't heard yet. The kitchen has gone quiet, not silent, just reverent. Like it too is holding its breath, acknowledging that something sacred has returned. You lift the jar again. It's warm. Not because the cupboard above the stove gets hot, quite the opposite, but because it holds something alive. A blend you didn't make, a blend you don't remember seeing, but one that feels, unmistakably, like home. You set it down in the center of the rack, not off to the side, not tucked in the back, right in the middle, where the light from the window hits at just the right angle. You don't label it, because labels can't hold everything. Later, maybe, when the memory returns or when you're ready, you'll open it again and find the name. But for now, you just know. This spice belongs. It has waited long enough. You rise, stretch, and reach for the vinegar jar. Yes, vinegar. Not the white one you use to clean brass. Not the fig vinegar your cousin swears is good for the skin. The deep one. The one with the dark, syrupy swirl that smells like patience and time and dried fruit left too long in a cool pantry. It's nearly empty. You smile, you drizzle the last few drops into a bowl, add a splash of rose water, and begin slicing cucumbers. Why? Because balance, because after grief, after mystery, after the sound of drawers opening themselves, you need something sharp, something clean, something cold. You toss the cucumber slices in the bowl, watch as they soak up the mixture, shimmer in the sunlight. Then, without thinking, you open the silk spice jar. You don't taste it. You don't scoop it. You just hold the lid near the cucumbers and let the scent hover. It's enough. You cover the bowl, set it on the windowsill, and let it rest. There's a phrase your grandmother used to say, "Some flavors are meant to be borrowed, not claimed." You never understood it. Now maybe you do. You turn back to the spice rack and open a drawer you haven't opened in a month. The drawer of talismans. Not actual charms, nothing you'd wear or carry, but spices believed to protect, to guide, to nudge the day in the right direction. Turmeric, to warm the joints and ward off unkind words. Nigella seed. The seed of blessing, they used to say. Caraway, for dreams that need anchors. Dried lime, sharp, bitter, clarifying. You used to avoid it. Now you keep a jar in reach at all times. You pick up the turmeric jar, open it. A soft golden cloud lifts into the air. You dip your finger in and mark a tiny dot on your wrist. Not a habit, just a moment. Historians still debate whether Ottoman kitchens blurred into ritual space or remained strictly culinary. But in this kitchen there's no debate. Here the spice rack is temple, and every meal is a hymn. You dust your hands, glance once more at the jar with no label, and think, what will I add next? Because that's the real secret. The rack isn't done. It never will be. It grows with every new mistake, every passed down joke, every blend that worked against the odds. Every morning you opened a drawer and didn't quite remember why you came, but found something worth keeping anyway. You reach into the quiet drawer again, the one with the tiny tulip spoon resting like a secret that said just once. You scoop a pinch of your lemon balm blend and drop it into a tiny muslin pouch. You tie it with thread and hang it above the window. You write a tiny tag for it. For days that hesitate, you do the same with a bit of rosemary and clove, for doors not yet knocked on. And then with lavender and fennel, for the stories that haven't started. You don't know when you'll use them, but they'll be there, waiting, like the drawer you hadn't opened in years, like the spoon that knew your hand before your fingers touched it, like the blend that reappeared from the past with no label and no announcement, only presence. Outside, the air turns the colour of burnt honey. A cat leaps softly onto the windowsill and peers into your bowl of cucumbers like it's considering a new career in salad. You shoo it gently, it yawns and stays. You pour yourself a glass of cold water with a single rose petal and a few flakes of crushed basil. You take a sip, and you say it out loud, "This is the spice of today." No one answers, except maybe the silk spice, which seems to exhale the faintest scent of dried apricot and memory. You turn to the spice rack, place both hands on the wood, and whisper, "I'll keep writing." And in that moment, every jar feels full. You wake the next day with ink on your hands, faint smudges of charcoal on your fingertips, a little curve of black beneath your thumbnail, evidence of yesterday's quiet labelling spree. You smile as you wash them clean at the basin, cool water splashing against your palms. The kitchen is still hushed, ill-hushed, the courtyard drowsy in early light. One of the cats snores in a sunbeam, curled into a circle of fluff and indifference. Today you feel pulled toward the high shelf, the one that requires a stool and some caution, because the last time you reached up there, a bundle of dried oregano fell directly into your hair, and your cousin spent 20 minutes laughing about it. You drag the stool into place and climb up carefully, bracing a hand on the edge of the rack. The top shelf houses the forgotten, jars too tall for the lower rows, or the spices used so rarely they become decorative. You crouch low to scan the lineup, your head tilted sideways like a curious bird. There it is, the old jar of mahalab. You pull it down slowly, it's heavier than you remember. A deep ceramic jar with a faded cobalt glaze, the lid bound by waxed twine and sealed with a dab of red wax. You haven't opened it in years. You hesitate. Mahalab is made from cherry pits, ground into a powder, perfumed like almonds, sharp at the back of the throat. It's not a spice you use often, it's ceremonial, specific. Used in festive breads, for births, for weddings, for beginnings. You cut the twine, the wax crumbles, the lid creaks as you lift it, and the scent escapes like a memory that's been waiting to stretch its legs. Not sweet, not bitter, just bold, a scent that knows it has a purpose. You smile, because today, maybe, that purpose is you. You scoop a little into a tiny bowl and leave it on the table, unclaimed for now. A flavour in search of a dish. You glance back at the shelf and notice a jar tucked in the very corner, half-shadowed. You retrieve it. No label, no string, no lid. Inside, dried apple slices, of course. You remember now your aunt brought them back from Erzurum years ago. Tart green apples, dried until leathery and stored in this very jar with a few whole cloves for preservation. You'd meant to turn them into a compote for the winter solstice, but forgot. You sniff them now. Still good. You chew one thoughtfully. It's sharp. A little dusty, but good. Real. You add a few slices to the mahalab bowl. Something is forming. A recipe, maybe. A moment. A kind of soft urgency. And that's when you remember something you tucked away in the ledger months ago. A scribbled note you never returned to. You flip through the pages, fingers searching faster than your eyes. There. Bread for when you're ready again. 2 cups flour. 1 TSP salt. Warm water, just enough. A handful of dried fruit. A half-whispered story. A spice you forgot you loved. Bake slowly. Let the scent decide when it's done. You stare at the words for a while. You gather what you need. You mix the dough by hand, feeling the flour resist at first, then yield. The mahlab joins the mix, just a pinch. Then the sliced apples, chopped finely. You hum while kneading, not a song, really, just a rhythm. Something to keep the dough turning. Your grandmother used to hum like this. So did your aunt. Maybe they're all part of the recipe. You cover the bowl, let it rise. While it rests, you open the rose petal drawer. Not to use it, just to hold a few in your hand. They're almost weightless, paper thin. You press one between the pages of the ledger next to the bread recipe. A little bookmark for the brave. You turn your attention to the guest shelf next. The space where you keep the polite spices, the ones that never offend, the blends you trust for first impressions. But today you shift them aside and make space for a new jar. You label it for when you're not sure. Inside goes a mix of soft flavors, powdered ginger, a bit of ground cardamom, a single crushed clove, and the last of your orange zest curls. You shake it gently. It smells like a deep breath before answering a question. You tuck it beside the thyme, not to be used yet, but waiting. You check the dough, ready, you shape it roughly, press it into a clay pan, and score the top with a dull knife. You don't follow a pattern, you let your hand wander. What emerges is a spiral, a slow turning swirl like steam rising or stories looping back to where they started. You bake it slow. The kitchen fills with the scent of mahlab and apples and flour, stretching towards something new. While it bakes, you open the silk spice jar, not to use, just to look. You dip the tulip spoon in, gently turn the powder. Beneath the top layer, you see a color you hadn't noticed before, like the blush of a sunset caught in a jar. It smells the same, soft, elusive, undeniable. You close it again and return it to its place of honor. Then you do something unexpected. You write a letter, not to a person, to the spice rack. You begin with, "You've been more than shelves. You've been a mirror." And from there, you let it pour. You write about the first jar you ever opened, the first blend you ruined, the time you cried into the cumin, the day you added sugar instead of salt, the moment you realized saffron was more than a luxury, it was a kind of bravery. You sign it simply, still learning. You fold the letter, slip it into the back panel behind the coriander drawer. Let it live there. Let the rack hold it. The bread is done. You pull it from the oven. The crust is golden, cracked slightly at the edge where the apple met the flame. You cut a slice, butter it, taste it while it's still too hot. It's not perfect, but it's true. You sit down, break off another piece, and stare at the spice rack, this quiet archive of your hands, your hunger, your healing, and you whisper not to be heard, but to say it out loud. Thank you for waiting for me. The kitchen rests with you. Late afternoon now, with sun pooled on the tile like honey. The shadows are long but gentle, not creeping, just stretching out, tired and content. The bread cools on a folded towel, cracked and golden, its crust whispering faint snaps as the air seeps in. You lean back in your chair, one bare foot propped against the leg of the table, the other gently brushing the stone floor. You should be cleaning up. That's what you normally do, but not today. Today feels like a day that asks for stillness. You reach for your tea, now lukewarm, and take a sip anyway. The flavors have settled into each other, lemon balm, fennel, a trace of something herbal and hard to name. It tastes like the tail end of a long conversation, comfortable, unhurried. You glance at the spice rack. It stares back. Well, not really, but it feels that way. You've been circling it for weeks now, opening drawers, refreshing jars, repainting labels, inventing blends, and all along there's been one drawer you haven't touched. Not because you forgot, because you didn't quite feel ready. It's the bottom left, a wide, shallow drawer with no label at all, no pattern on the wood, no cute knob shaped like fruit, just a smooth front, polished from years of use. You've avoided it like you avoid the last letter from someone who once knew your middle name and what you look like when you're trying not to cry. You rise, you kneel, You open it. Inside, dried lavender, brittle and pale, 2 cinnamon sticks tied with a faded ribbon, a muslin pouch containing anise, bay leaf, and what smells like orange peel steeped in thyme, and a letter, unfolded, unfinished, in your own handwriting. You'd forgotten this. You read, "This was supposed to be for her, for the recipe she never gave me, for the taste she carried in her hands but never wrote down. I've tried to remake it from memory, I've gotten close, but something's always missing." You close your eyes. You know who you meant. Your grandmother never gave you her pickling spice recipe. She gave you her silence, her stories, her laugh, and her enormous clay jar of pickled vegetables, but never the recipe itself. She said she didn't write it down because taste changes depending on who's hungry. You always thought that was cryptic. Now you think it was true. You run your fingers across the bundle of lavender and cinnamon. They crumble a little, like they've been waiting too long. You rise and walk to the pantry. Pull out vinegar, mustard seeds, black peppercorns, sugar, salt, garlic. You line them up on the table like a procession. Then carefully, you blend. You don't look at the book. You don't consult the margins of old notes. You let your hands choose. 1 pinch of this, a fistful of that, a leaf crumbled between your palms. You add a handful of sliced carrots, a few sprigs of dill, and pour the brine over the top in a wide-mouthed jar. It hisses softly as it fills, like it approves. You seal it, label it with a simple word, guesswork. Then you place it at the far end of the spice rack, not because it's a spice, but because it was born from them, and because it belongs to the same family of flavor and failure and forgetting and remembering again. Historians still argue whether home pickling was more necessity or tradition, more preservation or ritual. But in your kitchen, it's clearly something else entirely. An act of forgiveness. You wash your hands, dry them, and sit again. From the corner of your eye, you catch sight of the tulip spoon, still resting beside the silk spice jar, still gleaming in the amber light. You reach for it. This time, you use it. You open the silk spice jar and gently stir from the bottom, lifting a deeper layer of powder. It's a little darker, a little richer, like time has settled into it. You scoop a small amount, less than a pinch, and press it into your palm. It melts, not in texture, in presence. It smells like patience, like something left unsaid that doesn't need to be spoken anymore. You close the jar, you tuck the spoon back into its resting place, and then, feeling bold, you reach for the jar you never thought you'd use again, the one labelled The Apricot Wars. It contains a chaotic mix of dried fruit, a rogue bay leaf, one lonely cinnamon shard, and a spice blend your aunt swore was perfect for everything, and which, as it turned out, was perfect for nothing. You open the jar, you smell, and you laugh, because now it smelled good. Aged, softened, rounded. You shake a little into your palm, add it to a bowl with honey and hot water, and sip it like tea. It tastes like a truce, like a recipe finally finished, not by perfection, but by time. You close the drawer, all of them, one by one, not with finality, but with affection. Outside, the shadows stretch further now, touching the far edge of the courtyard. The cats have disappeared again, probably into some neighbour's garden. The breeze brings in a trace of grilled meat from down the road. You light a small oil lamp on the counter. The flame flickers once, then holds. You sit at the table, fold your hands, and whisper, "Let today settle." And it does, perfectly. The next morning brings the sound of sweeping, not yours. Someone outside in the alley, brushing dust from stone to stone in long, unhurried strokes. You hear the rhythm of bristles against earth like the heartbeat of the city before it fully wakes. You stay in bed a little longer, eyes half closed, letting the sound settle over your thoughts like a blanket. When you rise, the kitchen is cool and drowsy. The floor tiles are still holding the night's breath. You wrap your robe tighter and walk barefoot toward the spice rack, drawn the way plants tilt toward the sun. You don't need anything specific. You just want to be near it. You open a drawer at random, the fennel drawer. Again, your hands always seem to find it. The scent is softer than usual today, more grounded. You pinch a few seeds between your fingers, roll them thoughtfully. Then you reach for the vinegar jar, the fresh one you filled just 3 days ago. You drop the seeds in, watch them swirl to the bottom. You don't even know what you're making yet. But something in the movement feels necessary. The kitchen hums around you. You pull out your ledger and turn to the back. There's a page there you haven't written on, one you saved for someday. You open to it slowly and begin a new list. Spices I want to leave behind. The taste of apology spoken too late. The bitterness of saffron hoarded and never used. The dry heat of arguments over stew. The kind of rosemary that scratches instead of softens. The ghost of ginger added to impress, not express. You pause, then turn the page. Spices I hope someone finds after me. Bay leaves that carry old songs in their veins. Clove blended with laughter. Cinnamon rolled into a story that never ends the same way twice. Star anise left beside a window, gathering sunlight until it bursts. Fennel, waiting patiently, like always. You close the ledger and stand. Open the cupboard with the empty jars and begin labelling a new row, not for storage, but for possibility. The first is a wide-mouthed jar labelled simply, maybe. You fill it with a mixture of things that smell like hesitation. Dried sage, a fragment of basil, a single cracked cardamom pod, and 2 flakes of pepper that got lost between jars. You seal it, place it on the lowest shelf. You don't expect to use it, but it belongs. You continue. A smaller jar, eventually. This one gets dried marjoram, 1 star, anise, a thread of saffron that broke when you weren't looking, and a petal of rose that never made it into the tea. The sort of spice you'd add to something. Not now, but someday. Then, again, because some flavors circle back. Some stories ask for a second taste. You fill it with the last crumbs of your family's coriander blend, a sprinkle of the honey-laced pepper you called storm heat, and 1 torn bay leaf. You seal it with wax. You take a step back and look at the new jars lined in a quiet row along the bottom. They look like hope. Not the loud kind. The kind that smells faintly of citrus and old paper. You turn to the stove and begin assembling something simple. A soup, maybe. Lentils and carrots. Onions sautéed in ghee. Nothing extravagant. Just nourishment. You reach instinctively for the thyme drawer. Gone. Not the drawer, it's there, but the thyme is gone. Empty. Just a few brownish crumbs stuck to the linen. You stare for a moment, then smile. Because you'd meant to refill it yesterday. You just forgot. But now, somehow, it feels intentional, like it's asking you to stop and look. You lift the drawer out completely and peer into the space behind it, just to see. And there, tucked into the back, is a small bundle of folded cloth, pale green, tied with white thread. You've never seen it before. You untie it, slowly. Inside, a tiny cloth pouch. When you open it, the scent of thyme, real thyme, hits you like a rush of memory. Sharp, sweet, healing. But this thyme is different. It's fresh, not brittle, still soft. You blink, and you find a note tucked beneath the bundle. It reads, "Use this when the recipe asks for something missing, even if you don't know what that is yet." No signature, just the truth. You set the pouch beside the pot and sprinkle a little into the soup. The scent lifts instantly, green, familiar, grounding. You close your eyes, you stir, you taste. You don't add anything else. It's ready. You ladle it into a shallow bowl, place it on the table, and eat slowly, each spoonful sinking you deeper into something silent and safe. You don't rush. You don't garnish. You just let it be. Afterward, you wash the bowl, wipe the table, and return to the spice rack one last time before dusk. You touch each jar, not all of them, just the ones that catch your eye. A hand rested briefly on cinnamon. A knuckle tapped against coriander. A fingertip brushed across the silk spice. And then, at the very end of the row, you place one last jar. Small, unlabeled, empty, but cleaned, polished, warm in your hand. A jar for what hasn't arrived yet. You place it in the center and let it wait. That night, you dream of salt. Not the sharp, stinging kind, but a calm, quiet salt. The kind that lingers at the corners of your lips after a good meal, or the kind carried by a sea breeze that hasn't touched your skin in years. In the dream, you're standing in front of your spice rack, but it's taller than usual, much taller. It stretches upward into darkness, shelf after shelf after shelf, climbing into some soft void where spices go when they're no longer needed but still remembered. You climb. Every drawer you open smells like something familiar: gingerbread, pickled lemon, old stories. One drawer creaks open and it smells like the kitchen on your 12th birthday. Another smells like your aunt's favorite scarf. At the very top, after what feels like hours, you find a jar. It's labeled Mercy. You don't open it. You wake up smiling. The morning light is cool, filtered through a bank of early clouds. The kitchen feels refreshed, scrubbed by dreams. You stretch, tie your apron like armor, and open the window. Today's project comes to you as you sip your tea, reclaim the pepper drawer. You've been avoiding it. Not because of the pepper, it's useful, necessary, trustworthy, but because that drawer has always been a little chaotic. Ground black pepper leaking into the corners, whole peppercorns escaping their jar and rattling around like they own the place. The occasional rogue chili flake trying to stir up revolution. You open it. It's worse than you thought. There's a broken jar lip, a bent spoon, a paper label that's been torn, rewritten, and smudged so many times it simply reads, "Yes." You exhale, smile, time to clean. You empty everything out onto a cloth. You wipe down the inside with vinegar and lemon peel, scrub the spoon with a stiff bristle brush, and run your fingers over the base until the grain of the wood feels familiar again. Then comes the fun part. You start rebuilding. You create separate sachets, one for black pepper, one for pink, one for green. You find an old wooden jar for the white peppercorns, less common but necessary. You create a new label. For when a bite needs teeth, you place a jar of crushed Aleppo pepper in the corner, its color like dusk on fire. And then for balance, you add a tiny tin of long pepper, gnarled, strange, ancient. You almost never use it, but you like knowing it's there. Like keeping a sword above the fireplace even if you're more of a soup person. You pause, you pull out your ledger, you flip to a new page. Things I thought were just heat, but weren't. The ache in my chest when coriander runs out. The sting of mustard seeds popping before I'm ready. The warmth of ginger added by accident that made everything better. The silence that follows when someone tastes and doesn't say anything, but takes another bite. You close the ledger, you reach for the salt, not the usual salt. The black salt, earthy, sulfuric, a bit much on its own, but magical in the right hands. You place it beside the pepper, let them share the shelf. Enemies in theory, partners in practice. Then you do something strange, you create a blend, not for cooking, for reminders. You mix a pinch of black pepper, 1 grain of salt, a shred of dried lemon peel, and the last dried basil petal from the Nezrin jar. You tuck it into a folded paper and place it in the quiet drawer with the tulip spoon. You label the packet, use when forgetting who you are. And you leave it there. Later, as the day warms, you begin preparing a stew. One of those long simmering, everything in the pot affairs that require little skill and a lot of trust. You don't measure, you don't plan, you add what feels right. Cumin, yes, a whisper of cardamom, 2 cloves, bay leaf.
A pinch from the eventually jar. And then you reach for something new. The empty jar you placed at the center of the rack yesterday. You open it, still empty, but not void. You can almost taste what belongs there. You take a little from the silk spice, just a dusting, a single fennel seed, a sliver of dried apple. You add them in, then, because something inside you says wait, you add nothing more. You seal it again. Label it. Becoming. You place it back in the center. And the rack, as always, accepts. Outside, the wind shifts. A neighbor is baking something with nutmeg. You can smell it. You carry your pot outside to let the stew cool near the lemon trees.
One of the cats trails behind you, tail upright like a question mark. You sit on the steps, bowl in lap, and eat slowly, watching as the sun filters through the grapevine and paints your knees in flickering green. You look back through the kitchen window, and you see it, your spice rack. Still, whole, patient. You raise your spoon slightly, a small toast, to the stories it's held, to the ones still waiting. The next morning brings a chill. Not the sharp kind that bites your toes, but the slow, creeping coolness that slides beneath doors and tucks itself under your sleeves. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders and step into the kitchen, already craving warmth before the sun has decided whether it's showing up today. Your hands move without thought, kettle filled, flame lit, hands cupped for warmth long before the water boils. But your eyes drift toward the spice rack, drawn not to any one jar, but to the empty space in the bottom corner. Not a missing jar, an absence, like something should be there. You cross the room and crouch, examining the corner closely. The shelf is smooth pale from years of sunlight and slightly bowed under the weight of time. You touch it lightly, then run your fingers along the base. There. A groove, not wide, not deep, but unmistakably carved. You've seen this kind of groove before, on drawers designed to slide, on boxes meant to reveal secrets only when invited. You press, lightly. Nothing. You press again, a little to the left. Click. A panel shifts, not dramatically, just enough to suggest it's listening. You pull gently. A drawer, hidden beneath the rack, slides out on worn wooden runners. Inside, darkness, dust, and a bundle of fabric. Your breath catches. You lift it out and unwrap it. Inside, a notebook. The cover is soft leather, stained with years, etched with a tulip so faint it's nearly invisible. You open it slowly. Pages filled with ink. Careful handwriting, recipes, notes, diagrams of spice drawers, then sketches of spice spoons, ornate, tiny, unique. Pages of trial blends with names like midday drowsing and argument softener, and for when he comes home, silent. It's not your writing, but it's definitely your family. At the back, a letter. To the next hands, this rack will know you before you know yourself. Don't try to impress it. Just listen. Spices are stories that refused to be forgotten. Don't be the one who stops telling them. If a jar disappears, let it. If one returns, welcome it. And if a new one appears without explanation, use it. That's the only rule. You close the notebook slowly and place it back in the drawer. Not hidden, not shelved, just known. You tuck it beside the ledger, let the old words and the new ones sit together shoulder to shoulder, and then you start preparing the day's blend. You reach first for sumac, sharp, red, slightly sour, like waking up too quickly, then coriander, soft, citrusy, grounding, a pinch of ginger for the spark, a whisper of mace, because today needs a little drama. You mix them slowly in a small dish, stirring with the tulip spoon until the colours swirl together like silk in a current. You label it. For mornings that question your decisions. You spoon it into a clean jar and set it beside the maybe and eventually jars. And now the space looks whole again, not filled, not finished, just whole. You boil lentils, toast bread, and fry an egg in olive oil that sizzles just loud enough to remind you you're alive. You dust the new blend over the top and take a bite. You pause. It's perfect, but not for taste, for timing. You didn't know you needed this flavor today, but your hands did. Historians still argue whether Ottoman women followed recipes or worked from instinct, whether these spice racks were structured systems or ever-evolving chaos. But one thing's certain, your rack is alive. It forgets, it remembers, it forgives. You finish your breakfast and open the spice drawer labelled "Too Much," a joke jar filled with over-the-top blends that never worked. Clove and cumin and mint and licorice all at once. You take a whiff and laugh. Still awful. You leave it anyway. Because some flavours exist just to make others seem gentle. You clean the counters, sweep the floor, rinse the spoons. The sun begins to push through the clouds, soft and tentative, lighting the kitchen like a page being turned. You stop and make one more blend, not for cooking, not for company, for memory. You crush rose petals, mix them with dried orange, crumble a bay leaf, and stir in exactly 7 grains of white pepper. Then from the silk spice jar, a single scoop, just enough to colour the rest. You label it, "What if we hadn't forgotten?" And you place it in the top right corner of the rack. You don't say why, you don't have to, because the rack understands. Later that same day, the sky turns strange, not dark, just oddly colourless. A pale, matte hue that flattens the world and makes the shadows seem unsure of themselves. You feel it in your shoulders before you notice it in the sky. A quiet pressure, a hush in the bones. You glance at the spice rack. It's still there, of course, unmoved, unchanged, calm. But today, something about it feels alert. You light a small beeswax candle and set it near the counter. Not for the light, there's plenty. But because rituals don't always need explanations, some just ask to be honoured, you decide to spend the afternoon in the company of the miscellaneous drawer. It's the drawer that holds the odds and ends, little bits that didn't earn a jar or didn't need one, crumpled parchment cones with single herbs inside, a sachet of rosemary labelled only with a question mark, a twist of cloth holding a spice you think is fenugreek but could also be something from the neighbour's attempt at herbal confetti. You dump it out gently onto the table. What a beautiful mess. You sort through the contents like an archaeologist of your own past. Each bundle smells faintly of its own failed or forgotten experiment. You find 2 bay leaves stuck together with honey, a clove-studded orange that has long since mummified, a fragment of dried mint shaped like a comma, a note that says simply, "Not for soup." You don't remember writing it. You keep it anyway. You start repackaging. The mint gets its own jar. You mix it with lemon peel and a bit of coriander seed. Nothing fancy, just fresh. You label it. For unfinished sentences, you place it near the top, where the air is cooler and the light hits softest. And then you pick up the tiny, twisted packet of saffron. Only a few threads remain. You hold them up to the window, where the light slices through their red strands like stained glass. You place them carefully into a clean jar. No mixing, no additions, just saffron. You label the jar enough, because sometimes that's all you need. You lean back in your chair and stretch. The kitchen smells like nutmeg and vinegar and the edge of something sharp. You make tea, not a fancy one, just black tea with a single clove, floating like a tiny boat in a cup too wide. And as the tea steeps, your mind drifts to your neighbour. She once gave you a jar labelled, "Don't open unless desperate." You never asked what was in it. You never opened it. Today you do. You find it tucked in the back of the pantry, behind a bag of rice and a box of dried apricots that probably expired last year, but you'll never admit it. You twist the lid off slowly. The smell hits immediately. Something fermented, spiced. Strange. You're not sure if it's meant for eating or summoning. Inside, a dark paste, flecked with mustard seed, cumin, something floral, something smoky. You dip in a spoon, taste the smallest amount, and laugh, because it's terrible, but weirdly comforting. You reseal it. You don't label it. You just know now it wasn't for desperate hunger. It was for desperate curiosity. And that's been fed. You return to your spice rack and stare for a while. You notice the becoming jar has developed a faint fog on the inside of the glass. Not moisture, just a cloudiness like it's thinking something over. You open it, sniff. Still the same. But now there's a whisper of cardamom where there wasn't before. You don't remember adding it. You seal the jar again. and whisper, "I trust you," because by now you do. Historians still debate whether the arrangement of spices in Ottoman homes followed a logic of flavor, medicine, magic, or memory, but in this kitchen, it's all four. You reach for the silk spice again. This time, you add a pinch to a small bowl of yogurt, stir, and smear it onto flatbread with pickled onions and leftover lentils. It shouldn't work, but it does. You eat in silence, watching the clouds shift through the window, and think about how much flavor depends on silence, on space between the ingredients, on the seconds between sips. You write in the ledger, "Today I learned that not all spice is about taste. Some is just presence." And beneath that, in smaller letters, some jars won't reveal themselves until you're quiet enough to listen. You put down the pen, walk to the rack, and place your palm gently against the cedar panel on its side. Not to knock, not to open, just to say, "I'm still here." And the rack, in its wooden stillness, seems to say, "I know." The day begs tool. The day begins with a scent. Not one of your own making, not cinnamon, not cumin, not the quiet hush of coriander being crushed beneath a spoon, but a smell drifting in from the courtyard. Charcoal, yeast. A hint of something sweet and unfamiliar baking in someone else's kitchen. You pause. Your own kitchen is still asleep, the tiles cool beneath your feet and the air humming with soft possibility. You light the stove, boil water, and glance at your spice rack. Something's shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to make you pause in the doorway. One of the jars is turned slightly, the label not facing out the way you left it. You walk over, slowly. It's the eventually jar. You smile, turn it back to its neat line, but inside something is different. You open the lid, sniff carefully. Rosemary? That wasn't there yesterday. You stir gently with the tulip spoon. The blend is evolving, slightly, silently. You let it be. Some things don't need managing. You brew your tea, green, plain, grounding. You open the drawer marked Rainy Day and toss a dried hibiscus petal into the cup just for colour. It bleeds into the liquid like ink into water. A watercolour morning. While the tea steeps, you take inventory. It's a habit now, more mindfulness than maintenance. One by one, you open the jars. The sumac has grown duller in colour but sharper in scent. The mint is brittle but smells like an old hymn. The black salt clumps slightly. You break it apart with the back of a spoon. You notice your too much drawer is nearly full again. Somehow, you shake your head. Apparently, too much happens even when you don't mean for it to. You open it, stir through the chaos. You find a blend of turmeric and cinnamon and dried lemon that smells like an overexcited perfume. You laugh. You bottle it anyway. Label it The Enthusiast. Place it beside Argument Softener. That feels poetic. Then comes a whisper in your brain, a memory, sudden and persistent. Your mother's bitter tea. You haven't thought about it in years. Bitter tea made from unripe olives and black seed and some dried root she never named. She'd drink it when her heart was heavy, her hands quiet, her thoughts loud. You remember the way it made your lips twist, and how she always said, "Good for the soul, not for the tongue." You decide to try it. You start gathering. Black seed, check. Dried lemon peel, yes. Fenugreek, present and accounted for. You skip the olive leaves, substitute dried fig skin. Just a sliver, you brew. It smells like memory. You sip. It still makes your mouth pucker and your eyebrows lift of their own accord, but you keep drinking. You take the rest and pour it into a small clay pot. You soak cheesecloth in it, then wrap it around your wrists. A trick your aunt taught you for drawing out thoughts that won't go quietly. As the cloth cools, you sit in front of your rack and write in the ledger. Today I drank bitterness on purpose. Then, beneath it, it did not make me kind, but it made me quiet. You closed the book. From the pantry, you retrieve a bundle of dried fig leaves. You crush a few and mix them with rosemary and orange peel, grinding slowly in your mortar. The pestle sings its usual low song. Scratch, twist, crush, pause. You scoop the blend into a jar, label it. For when gentleness requires effort. And just like that, the shelf looks more complete. You step back, take in the whole rack. It's not just spice anymore. It's mood, it's memory, it's confession. You notice that the maybe jar is now half empty. You don't remember using it. You don't remember lending it. But maybe it lent itself. You write a new label, whatever's left, and you tape it to the inside of the cupboard door, not on a jar, just loose. A kind of invitation, a kind of shrug. Later, as evening softens the window light, you open the secret notebook again, the one from the hidden drawer. You flip to the very back. There's one final recipe, unfinished. It reads, to remember who you were before the kitchen. No measurements, no names, just one breath held between spice and silence, one jar left unopened, and one story you haven't told yet. You close the notebook. Your eyes rest on the empty jar at the far left, the one you placed there weeks ago. Still clean, still waiting. You carry it outside into the last light of day. You fill it with a piece of dried sky, the kind that falls from fig leaves, one fennel seed from your pocket, a curl of cinnamon bark that snapped too soon, a petal of hibiscus from your morning tea. You seal it, no label, because some jars are just beginnings. You wake up early the next morning, before the cats, before the neighbours' sweeping begins, even before the street seller with the sesame bread cart clinks his bells through the alley. The kitchen is a cathedral of silence, and the air tastes faintly of sleep and leftover time. You move gently, as though afraid to wake the house. The first thing you do is walk to the spice rack, not for use, not even for curiosity, just to check that it's still there, still whole, still watching. It is. You sit at the kitchen table, hands cupped around a bowl of warm water and lemon peel. You're not brewing tea. You're just listening. Sometimes the spice rack doesn't speak in scent or sound. Sometimes it speaks in absence, like today. You notice, after a few minutes, that the guesswork jar is gone, not misplaced, gone. You stare at the empty space where it used to live, between eventually and for unfinished sentences. You open the cupboard, check behind the vinegar, behind the spare napkins. Nothing. And you don't panic, because by now you understand. Jars leave when they've finished what they came to do. You write in the ledger, guesswork left while I was sleeping. I hope it found someone who needed it more. You tap your pen lightly on the table, thinking, then flip to a blank page and begin a new list. Jars I never expected to keep. The enthusiast, don't open unless desperate. Too much. Whatever's left. The empty jar with no label that still feels full. You stretch, rising slowly. Open the sour drawer, your collection of things that make your face twist. Tamarind, dried sumac, dried green mango slices, fermented garlic. You mix a little of each into a paste. The scent is aggressive. Your eyes water a bit. You add sugar, not to sweeten, to confuse. You taste. It's awful. You bottle it anyway. Label it. Regret. You chuckle. Then immediately reach for the jar beside it. Mercy. And smear a little of its powder onto a slice of bread. Balance. You remember what your grandmother once said, and you have to taste bad choices sometimes just to know when you're being gentle. Historians still argue whether spices in Ottoman kitchens were categorized by taste, by season, or by emotion. But here, today, you categorize by honesty. Later in the morning, the postman brings you a small, wrapped parcel. Inside 3 glass vials and a letter from a cousin you haven't seen in 10 years. The letter is short. Found these in the back of Baba's old pantry. Thought of you. You uncork the first vial. Cumin, clearly. But old, aged, powdered into memory. You sniff the second. Marjoram. You smile. The third? Unknown. You open it carefully, tip it into your palm, a fine reddish powder but unfamiliar. You sniff. You blink. It smells like dusk. You open the notebook from the hidden drawer and look through the pages again. Near the middle, in tiny writing, you find a note. If it smells like dusk, trust it. You do. You place the spice in a clean jar, label it simply dusk, and place it near the silk spice, close enough to be friends. By mid-afternoon, the kitchen feels warm and thoughtful. You begin to make a dessert you haven't made in years, candied orange peel in rosewater syrup dusted with clove. You prepare each peel slowly, as though you're writing them a goodbye letter. You boil them down, add sugar, reduce the syrup until it thickens into longing. Then, for the first time, you reach for becoming. You add the smallest pinch to the pan. The scent blooms like a memory you didn't know you had. You ladle the finished peels onto wax paper, dust them with a bit of powdered sugar, and leave them to rest. Then you sit down.
And you cry. Not from sadness, from fullness, because for once the recipe worked, not because it was correct, but because it was ready. You write in the ledger, "Today I fed something I thought I'd buried," and beneath it, it tasted like orange, rose, and the word wait. As evening descends, you light a single lamp in the kitchen. The cats return, the neighbour sweeps again, the house exhales, and you quietly, gently, prepare to create one last jar before sleep. You gather a few ingredients. The first leaf from your new rosemary plant, a few granules of sea salt scraped from the corners of a forgotten tin, a dried flower from your windowsill, the final thread of saffron from your mother's tea. You grind them slowly. The powder is soft.
Pale gold. You bottle it, label it, for the next version of me, and then you place it not on the spice rack, but on your bedside table. Morning sunlight creeps in gently, tracing long fingers across the stone floor of your kitchen. You sit up in bed, gaze at the small jar on your bedside table, for the next version of me. It didn't shift in the night, but somehow you feel it has changed anyway. You carry it to the kitchen like a relic, careful not to spill a single grain. You place it not back on the rack, but in the windowsill where the sun can warm it. Let it ripen in light, like an idea. Your kettle hums on the stove. You begin your morning blend, a soft mix of dried mint, lemon balm, and 2 crushed coriander seeds.
Nothing ambitious.
Ambitious, just something that reminds you to begin slowly. As the tea steeps, your eyes scan the spice rack. You notice the too much jar has a crack, a hairline fracture, barely visible, like a secret trying to leave politely. You lift it. The contents inside are fine, chaotic as ever. You swirl the jar gently. It moans in scent, cloves and licorice and grief, and something that might be joy if it weren't so eager. You set it down, not on the rack, but on the shelf above the stove where retired spices go to rest. You place a note next to it. "Thank you for the drama. I needed the quiet more." Then you wipe the rack with a damp cloth. Not because it's dirty, but because sometimes tenderness looks like maintenance. You pause at the middle drawer, the one you rarely open. It's labelled Foundation. You know it holds the everyday spices, cumin, turmeric, coriander, salt. The basics, the scaffolding of every meal you've ever made. You open it, everything is in its place, but today you see them differently. Not just as ingredients, but as companions. Cumin, a warm hug. Turmeric, a wound healer. Coriander, the reason you stayed when you wanted to leave. Salt, the punctuation at the end of every thought. You stir your tea. Sip. Watch the breeze nudge the curtain like a breath against your cheek. Then, gently, you remove everything from the foundation drawer. One by one, you don't throw anything away, but you update. You take fresh coriander from your most recent batch, ground it lightly, and replace the old. You mix in a handful of toasted cumin seeds, something new, something bolder. The turmeric? You blend it with a pinch of dry ginger and label the mixture Firelight. You write in the ledger, "My foundation doesn't have to stay the same. I can renovate gently." Then with quiet care, you create a new jar, just one. Inside you place a blend that's soft, supportive, steady. Bay leaf, cracked pepper, 1 flake of dried basil, a whisper of nutmeg. You label it Home and place it dead center on the spice rack. It belongs to no drawer, no category. It belongs to you. You prepare a simple lunch, lentil soup with garlic and lemon sprinkled with home. It tastes like the first deep breath after crying. You nap afterward, the kind of nap that pulls you under like a tide, and when you rise, everything feels quieter, not outside, but inside. You light a candle for no reason. You sweep the floor without urgency. You hum a tune your grandmother used to hum while she cooked, though you never knew the words. Evening leans in. The kitchen glows warm and gold. Shadows gather gently at the edges, and the air smells faintly of thyme and something unnamed. You make a small dessert, warm milk with honey stirred with a cinnamon stick, poured over torn bread, and baked slowly until it sets. You serve it in your smallest bowl, dusted with the contents of dusk. You eat with a spoon that once belonged to someone who left their scent in every drawer, and as you wash the dishes, you begin singing the tune you hummed earlier. Still no words, but somehow, now, it feels complete. You walk to the spice rack one last time before bed. You notice a new jar, unlabeled, small, resting where guesswork used to live. You don't touch it, not yet. You smile and say aloud to no one, "Welcome." Then you dim the lights, turn on the fan, and let the night come in. The wind is playful this morning. It dances across the sill, slips through the kitchen curtains, flips the corners of your recipe notebook, and scatters dried basil leaves across the counter like it's trying to write its own menu. You let it. You move slower today, not from tiredness, but from ease. The kind that only shows up when everything feels both familiar and new at the same time. You walk to the spice rack, bare feet against cool tile, and pause in front of the new jar. Still unlabeled, still unopened, still humming. You lean closer. Not a real hum, of course, but the sort of silent vibration that only exists when an object is aware of being observed. The jar sits perfectly still, its contents pale, powdery, fine. You resist the urge to name it. Instead, you write in the ledger, "A spice appeared. I won't name it yet. I'll let it name me first." You close the book softly and begin your day's blend. You decide to experiment. From the mercy jar, a pinch of crushed marjoram and lavender. From too much, now retired but still reachable. The tiniest grain of black licorice dust. From home, just enough coriander to anchor the rest. You mix them in a small ceramic bowl, taste with a fingertip. It doesn't need anything else. You label it almost, because sometimes perfection is overrated. You set it aside and begin a meal with no end goal, what the elders used to call a pot to think by. You simmer lentils, sauté garlic, slice leeks and drop in potatoes without peeling them. As it cooks, you take inventory of your emotion jars. You didn't mean to organize them that way, but now that you see it, regret, becoming, maybe, for the next version of me. Whatever's left, home, almost. You laugh. Apparently, you've built a library of feelings, and your hefty spice rack? It's the catalogue. You light a stick of myrrh, an old, smoky smell that your great-aunt swore helped bread rise faster, and sit at the table while the scent wraps around your thoughts like an old shawl. You open the secret notebook again and flip through its pages. Today, your eyes catch a line you'd overlooked before. Spices don't ask for understanding, they ask for permission. You close your eyes, let that settle, then rise. You reach for the unlabeled jar. You open it. Inside, a fine pale powder, cream-coloured, with hints of gold and moss green. You touch a fingertip to it, taste, and then pause. It tastes like newness, not freshness, not mint or lemon or anything bright. Newness, like something beginning even if you don't know where. You close the jar gently, and instead of naming it, you place it on its own shelf. No label, just presence. You write a new entry in the ledger. Today I tasted something without asking it what it was. And beneath it, maybe that's what trust feels like. Evening rolls in with a soft hush. The sky turns that watercolor gradient of peach to violet. The floor creaks beneath your heel in the same place it always has. The spoon drawer sticks again. You laugh. You prepare a tray of dates, soaked in rosewater, coated in crushed pistachio, and dusted lightly with cinnamon. You place them beside a cup of bitter black tea, no sugar, and a single petal of hibiscus in the saucer. You carry the tray outside, sit on the steps. The moon is climbing quietly. You take a bite. You sip the tea. You sigh. And for the first time in days, you don't reach for the ledger. You just sit. Let the flavors linger. Let the silence hold. And watch as in the window behind you, your spice rack glows faintly, touched by candlelight, shadow, and the memory of every hand that ever turned a jar, took a pinch, or whispered thanks. The next day, you do something radical. You take everything off the spice rack. Every jar, every drawer, every sachet tucked behind a bottle, every twist of cloth holding that one mysterious root you never figured out how to use. The entire rack is cleared shelf by shelf until only the polished wood remains, bare and quiet and blinking in the morning sun like it's just woken up. You stand back. It looks smaller like this. You run your palm along its surface. Every groove and scratch tells a story. There's the stain from the time you spilled rose syrup during a thunderstorm. The tiny nick from when you dropped the tulip spoon. The faint trace of turmeric in the corner that even vinegar couldn't banish. It is not a rack, it is a journal without words. You begin to clean, not just dusting, a ritual cleaning, vinegar, lemon peel, bay leaf water. You steep them together and wipe every shelf with a cloth soaked in the scent. You hum while you do it, not a song, just a sound, low and steady. The rack seems to sigh beneath your touch. You don't rush. By the time you finish, the room smells like longing and fresh decisions. You leave the rack empty for a while, just to see what it wants to become. While it dries, you set to work on something new, a spice map. You draw a rectangle on parchment, roughly the shape of your rack, and begin sketching where each spice was. But instead of names, you write emotions. Comfort, fear, restlessness, forgiveness, the good kind of silence, the sound of spoons. Then beside it, you draw the rack again. This time you don't fill it in, you leave the jars blank. You title the parchment, before and after, optional. You fold it. Place it in the ledger, not to use, just to know it exists. Afternoon light falls across the empty rack, and slowly you begin putting things back, but differently. You place mercy higher than before. Too much stays retired. Regret gets a smaller jar. You group home, becoming, and almost together, not because they match, but because they understand each other. The jar with no label stays on its own shelf. You place dusk next to firelight, because evenings and embers should be friends. You relabel one jar that's always bothered you. It used to say bitterness. You scratch it out. Now it says truth. You take one final blend from the bottom of a forgotten drawer, old marjoram, orange zest, and a whisper of dried thyme. You crumble it into your hand, smell it, and smile. You toss it out the window, let the wind have it. Historians still debate whether the women of Ottoman kitchens saw their spice racks as utilitarian, sacred, or simply sentimental. But none of them mention this, rearranging the rack rear. He rack rearranges the soul. And yours? Feels newly furnished. You make dinner without a recipe, just instinct and suggestion. Lentils, cumin, garlic softened in butter, finished with a dusting of almost, and a spoonful of yogurt. You eat, slowly, barefoot, leaning against the counter. Then, with the last light slipping away, You pour a glass of warm milk. You stir in cardamom. Just a touch. Then something strange happens. You walk to the spice rack, open the small drawer beneath the shelf, the one that once held the notebook, and there's something inside. Not placed by you. A slip of folded paper. You open it. It reads, "When the rack begins to dream, listen closely." You stare at it, then smile. Because maybe you've been dreaming too. You fold the note, slide it into the ledger, and write, "The rack is changing me, one jar at a time." The fan hums in the corner. Your tea cools on the table. The air smells faintly of nutmeg and question marks, and behind you, the spice rack breathes easy. The air feels thick today, not with heat, though summer is stretching itself across the rooftops like a lazy cat, but with possibility, the kind that clings to your skin like steam and sits at the edge of every sentence, waiting to become something. You make your way to the kitchen in that slow, sleepy way reserved for Sundays and emotional clarity. The spice rack greets you in silence. Not stillness, silence, the kind that suggests something is about to begin, or has just ended. You open the ledger and pause. No entry. Today, not yet. Instead, you stand in front of the rack and ask aloud, "What haven't I made?" The answer arrives as a feeling, not a word. So you begin pulling jars. Mercy, dusk, truth, the unlabeled one, of course. And from the retired section, a bit of too much, just a pinch for chaos. You grind them together in the mortar, slow and careful, like you're stirring memories. The smell is strange, familiar, foreign, soft. You sprinkle it into a pot of milk and honey and let it simmer low. It doesn't need a name. You drink it at the table, watching shadows slide along the floor like thoughtful dancers. Every corner of the room seems to stretch and sigh. The windows glow, the light changes colour. You write, "I drank something that didn't want to be remembered, but I will remember it anyway." Then, for the first time, you open the bottommost drawer of the spice rack, the one you've avoided since you moved in. Inside, to your surprise, nothing. No forgotten jar, no mysterious blend, just a scrap of fabric. You unfold it. A small cloth sachet. It smells like earth, like cold air, like clove and absence. Tucked inside, one seed, round, smooth, unidentifiable. You hold it in your palm. It radiates quiet energy. You don't plant it. Not yet. You place it in a bowl and write on a piece of paper, "When I'm ready." You tuck the bowl beside the empty jar labelled "For the next version of me." They seem to get along. Dinner is modest, rice with sautéed greens and lemon zest, but you eat it slowly, adding flakes of almost with each bite, like punctuation. You drink water with crushed mint and cucumber, refreshing, simple, just enough to remind your body that it is still a garden. And then near dusk you feel it, a shift in the room. You turn. The unlabeled jar is glowing slightly in the candlelight. You walk to it, open it. Inside, the powder is gone. In its place, something crystalline. Not salt, not sugar. Something new. You don't taste it. You don't label it. You simply close the lid and say, "Thank you." Because sometimes mystery is the most nourishing thing you can offer your soul. Historians still argue whether spice racks were tools of order or vessels of chaos, whether they shaped the kitchen or merely mirrored it. But tonight, standing in a kitchen softened by shadow and lit only by a single flickering flame, you know this. The rack is a mirror. And you? You've been changing all along, not becoming someone else, but becoming more yourself. You dust the table, water your basil, and for no reason, open the ledger one last time. You write, "I didn't need a recipe, I needed a rhythm." And then, in tiny handwriting below it, "And maybe
a little bit of cardamom." You blow out the candle, let the dark rise, and step into it like someone who finally knows what every jar was trying to say. Tonight, you don't light the kitchen lamp. You let the dusk settle in as it pleases, filling the room with long shadows and quiet warmth. The tiles are cool under your feet, the air still faintly perfumed from whatever the neighbor was cooking, maybe lentils, maybe stewed eggplant, or perhaps just time itself, slow roasted into something nourishing. You move through the room like a memory, not in a rush, not with purpose, just present. The spice rack waits. You pause before it, the way one pauses at a painting that's changed while your back was turned, not in shape, not in size, just in meaning. You run your fingers along the edge of the bottom shelf.
You whisper, "Still here." And for once you feel it whisper back. You prepare a final blend, not for eating, not for drinking, for dreaming. You open becoming, a whisper of saffron, a breath of rosemary. Then dusk, its smoky depth like velvet in powder form, a pinch of mercy for softness. And the tiniest crystal from the unlabeled jar, just one, dropped in like a star. You mix it with oil, rub it gently on your wrists, and inhale. It smells like closure. Or maybe a threshold. You step back from the rack, and instead of a label, you place a ribbon across it. Not tied, just resting. A gesture that says, "We're resting now." You drink warm water with lemon and a flake of salt. Then open the drawer with the seed again. It's still there. You hold it for a while. Then slowly you place it into a small pot of soil you'd set on the windowsill days ago. You don't press it down. You just let it rest there and say, "You can grow whenever you're ready." You don't wait for an answer. You don't need one. You tidy the counter. You fold the linen towel with the turmeric stain. You realign one crooked label. Almost had drifted a little. You water the mint. You look at the sky. It's velvet now. You write one final line in the ledger. Not an entry, a closing. All spices fade, but their stories linger in the air. Then at last, you pull out the small pillow you keep beneath the bench. You lie down. The fan hums softly in the corner. The kitchen breathes around you. And your spice rack, your beautiful, chaotic, deeply honest spice rack, rests right beside you, just as it always has. And now, dear listener, you let yourself slow. No more rearranging, no more reaching. Just you lying still in a kitchen washed in the silver hush of night. The jars no longer call to you. They've told their stories. They've taught you patience and attention and the soft rebellion of creating something for no reason but your own delight. Let your breath ease now. Let your shoulders loosen. You don't need to remember every spice, every label, every lesson. You only need to remember that you made a space for yourself, one pinch at a time. The room around you is warm with quiet memory. The shelves no longer wait to be filled. They are content. Your ledger is full of scribbles, crossed out lines, and truths you didn't know you believed until they spilled out between teaspoons and cinnamon. Outside, the stars blink above tiled rooftops. Inside, the fan offers its steady lullaby. Let your eyes close gently now. Let the smell of rosemary, of old wood, of stories told in steam and spice wrap around you like the oldest comfort. You've done enough. You've become enough. And tomorrow, if you wish, you can begin again. But for now, rest. Let the kitchen sleep, let the spices dream, and let yourself be held in that quiet, perfect space between scent and silence.